In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
In the vast tapestry of infinite realities, there exist universes where humanity reaches for the stars with clean hands and noble purpose. The boy's universe was not one of them. Here, on an earth scarred by corporate greed and false idols, humanity had learned to worship those who wore capes and smiles while their souls rotted with corruption. But what happens when a being who once unified all of Terra through will and fire alone steps into a world that has forgotten what true power looks like? What happens when the master of mankind, architect of the Imperium, creator of the Primarchs, and the most formidable psyker in human history, finds himself in a reality where the strongest heroes are merely products manufactured and marketed like soft drinks? The answer would reshape everything. If you crave stories where unstoppable forces collide with immovable objects, where true power confronts manufactured celebrity, then subscribe and witness what happens when the 41st millennium's greatest tyrant walks among us. The Emperor protects. But from what? And at what cost? The anomaly appeared above New York City at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would be remembered as the day reality cracked open. No alarms preceded it. No satellites detected its approach. One moment, the autumn sky stretched clear and blue above Manhattan's gleaming towers. The next, the air itself screamed. A tear opened in the fabric of space, not the neat portal of science fiction, but a wound that bled golden light and psychic pressure. Windows across 15 city blocks shattered simultaneously. Birds fell from the sky, their primitive minds overwhelmed. Every electronic device within a mile radius flickered and died as something impossibly vast forced its way through dimensions never meant to touch. Then he stepped through. The figure descended slowly, deliberately, as though gravity itself requested permission before affecting him. He stood perhaps 7 feet tall, clad in golden armor that seemed to drink in the sunlight and radiated back as something purer, more fundamental. No cape adorned his shoulders. He needed no theatrical additions. The armor itself was a masterwork beyond anything Earth's greatest engineers could comprehend. Each plate positioned with mathematical perfection, inscribed with symbols that hurt to perceive directly. But it was his face that stopped the world. Beneath a mane of dark hair, features of impossible symmetry regarded the city with eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. This was not the face of a young god or an immortal trapped in youth. This was ageless authority made flesh, a countenance that had commanded respect when Rome was still a dream, that had walked when the first humans discovered fire. When those golden eyes swept across the skyline, they carried the weight of 40,000 years of absolute certainty. The Emperor of Mankind had arrived. Around him, the tear in reality sealed itself with a sound like a choir of brass instruments being crushed. The psychic pressure that had accompanied his arrival didn't fade. It settled into the background like a new law of physics, a constant reminder that something fundamental about this world had changed. He stood suspended 30 feet above Fifth Avenue, and for a long moment simply observed. The sounds reached him first, the cacophony of a civilization drowning in its own noise. Car horns, construction equipment, the endless babble of millions of voices all competing to be heard over one another. Then the smells: petroleum exhaust, processed food, the chemical tang of a society that had learned to synthesize everything and engineer nothing of worth. And finally, the sights. Towers of steel and glass reaching toward heaven, impressive by the standards of a primitive age, but laughably crude compared to the hive spires of Terra. But it was what he sensed beneath the surface that caused his expression to darken. His psychic awareness expanded outward, touching the minds of the millions below. Unlike the warp-saturated reality he had left behind, this universe felt psychically thin. The Immaterium barely touched this place, which meant his more esoteric abilities would require greater focus. But his fundamental powers, the abilities that had made him the master of mankind, remained fully intact. What he found in those millions of minds made something ancient and cold stir in his chest. Fear. Everywhere, fear. Not the healthy caution that kept prey animals alive, but a systemic, cultivated terror. These people lived in constant awareness of beings they called supes, individuals with abilities beyond human norm who were supposed to protect them, but whom they secretly dreaded. The Emperor sifted through 1,000 surface thoughts in seconds, piecing together the shape of this world. A corporation called Vought International manufactured heroes. Compound V, marketing departments deciding who lived and died based on quarterly projections. Superheroes who smiled for cameras while their souls festered with narcissism, cruelty, and barely restrained psychosis. And at the top of this rotten pyramid, a being called Homelander, a flying brute with heat vision and delusions of divinity, worshipped by millions who had no idea their god was a petulant child in an adult's body. The Emperor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had seen this pattern before. On 1,000 worlds during the Great Crusade, he had encountered societies where the strong brutalized the weak, where power without purpose created only suffering. Each time, he had done what was necessary. Each time the methods had been brutal because mercy toward corrupt systems was cruelty toward their victims. This world was no different. If anything, it was worse, because these people should have known better. Below, the first screams began as people noticed the golden figure hovering in the sky. Phones emerged from pockets, cameras activating, social media posts beginning to flood the internet. Some thought it was a new Supe debut, another of Vought's manufactured celebrities. Others recognized that something about this figure was fundamentally different from anything they had seen before. The Emperor descended slowly, his armored boots touching down in the center of Fifth Avenue with a sound like a cathedral bell being struck. The concrete cracked beneath him in a perfect radius, hairline fractures spreading outward in geometric patterns. Traffic had already stopped, drivers abandoning their vehicles to either flee or stare in awe. He stood in the middle of the street, a golden colossus surrounded by the monuments of a civilization that had achieved so much and understood so little. His eyes swept across the crowd, gathering at a respectful distance, and he saw them truly. Billions of humans with potential squandered, living in fear of manufactured gods, while their true destiny, their genetic and cultural apotheosis, was denied to them by corporate interests and systematic corruption. Unacceptable. A news helicopter approached, its camera zooming in on his face. The Emperor glanced at it once. The helicopter's engine immediately died, forcing the pilot to execute an emergency landing 3 blocks away. No violence, no dramatic gesture, simply the application of will upon reality. The machine stopped because he wished it to stop. That was when the first Supe arrived. A train materialized in a blur of motion, his signature speed leaving a trail of disturbed air. He skidded to a halt 20 feet from the Emperor, all cocky smile and media-trained confidence. The speedster was dressed in his ridiculous costume, blue and silver, more appropriate for a circus than serious combat. And his body language screamed the arrogance of someone who had never encountered a genuine threat. "Hey there, big guy," A-Train said, his voice carrying that carefully crafted, friendly but authoritative tone that Vought media coaches drilled into their talent. "I'm gonna need you to come with me. We've got some questions about your dramatic entrance. You know, standard superhero stuff. Vought protocol. The Emperor said nothing. He simply looked at A-Train, and in that gaze, the speedster saw something that made his smile falter. A-Train had looked into the eyes of gang members, terrorists, and various criminals throughout his career. He had seen anger, fear, hatred, desperation, but he had never seen what he saw in the Emperor's eyes. Absolute certainty backed by the power to reshape reality according to that certainty. It was like looking into the eyes of a force of nature that had learned to think. Okay. Strong silent type, A-Train continued, his voice losing some of its confidence. Look, man, you can't just... You are irrelevant, the Emperor said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the weight of authority so absolute that every person within earshot felt their spine straighten involuntarily. This was the voice that had commanded Space Marine legions, that had given orders which reshaped galaxies, that had spoken with such conviction that reality itself bent to accommodate it. A-Train's mouth hung open. In his entire career, no one had ever dismissed him so completely, so effortlessly. He was one of the seven, a household name, a hero with action figures and endorsement deals worth millions. And this, whoever this was, had just called him irrelevant with the same tone someone might use to comment on the weather. What did you just... A-Train started to respond. His pride stung. The Emperor raised one gauntleted hand, and A-Train's body locked in place. It wasn't telekinesis in the traditional sense. The Emperor's psychic might simply informed A-Train's nervous system that movement was no longer an option, and his body obeyed. The speedster's eyes widened in panic as he realized he couldn't move, couldn't activate his powers, couldn't even fall over. He was a statue, preserved in that moment of indignant outrage. "You will stand there," the Emperor continued, his tone utterly calm, "and contemplate how thoroughly you have wasted the genetic advantages given to you. When I have finished more important matters, I will decide what to do with you." The Emperor stepped past the frozen soupe without another glance, walking toward the closest building, a luxury hotel whose facade reflected the afternoon sun. Behind him, A-Train remained perfectly still, a living statue whose eyes could track but whose body could not respond. The crowd parted before the Emperor like water before the prow of a ship. Some ran, others stood transfixed, unable to look away from this being who radiated authority like the sun radiated heat. He paid them no attention, his mind already working on the larger problem. He needed information, this world's technology level, its political structures, its power dynamics. He needed to understand what had brought him here and whether return was possible. Most importantly, he needed to understand the full scope of this compound V and the manufactured soups it created. Because if this world had discovered genetic enhancement, even in this crude form, then it possessed the seeds of something the Emperor had spent millennia perfecting. The question was whether those seeds had already been too corrupted by greed and stupidity to salvage. As he reached the hotel entrance, the glass doors slid open automatically. The Emperor paused, looking up at the building's height, at the primitive architecture and wasteful design. Somewhere in this city, in this world, were the answers he sought. Somewhere the architects of humanity's degradation sat in boardrooms and laboratories, congratulating themselves on their cleverness while missing the potential of what they had created. They would learn their error soon enough. The Emperor of Mankind stepped into the building, and the world would never be the same. The hotel lobby fell silent as the Emperor entered. Marble floors stretched beneath his feet, reflecting golden armor in distorted patterns. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, their light suddenly seeming pale and inadequate compared to the radiance that accompanied this newcomer. Staff members behind the mahogany desk froze mid-motion, their customer service smiles dying as instinct overrode training. They knew, on some primal level, that they stood in the presence of something far beyond their understanding. The Emperor approached the front desk with measured steps, each footfall producing a sound that seemed to echo longer than physics should allow. The concierge, a young man whose name tag read Marcus, found himself unable to look away from those golden eyes. He had checked in celebrities, foreign dignitaries, even soups on occasion. None of them had made him feel like an insect being studied by something vast and incomprehensible. "Your communication systems," the Emperor said, his voice carrying absolute expectation of compliance. "Direct me to one with access to this world's information networks." Marcus's mouth opened and closed twice before words emerged. The business center. Second floor. But sir, we require..." The Emperor placed one armored finger on the marble countertop. Where it touched, the stone began to glow faintly, intricate patterns spreading outward like circuitry made of light. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the patterns flowed across the desk surface, down the front panel, and disappeared into the floor. "You require nothing," the Emperor said simply. "Your security systems, your payment processors, your guest registries, all of it now recognizes my authority. I am registered in every database that matters. Questions?" Marcus shook his head mutely. "Excellent. You are dismissed." The concierge didn't need to be told twice. He and the other staff members retreated to the back offices, leaving the Emperor alone in the lobby. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a crowd was gathering. Police sirens wailed in the distance. News vans were arriving, their satellite dishes rising like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. The Emperor ignored them all. He had 40,000 years of experience dealing with primitive authorities who didn't understand what they faced. They would learn their place soon enough. He ascended the stairs to the second floor, each step producing that same resonant echo. The business center consisted of a dozen computer terminals arranged in individual cubicles, designed for privacy and productivity. Primitive by the standards of the Imperium, laughably so, but sufficient for his immediate needs. The Emperor sat, and the chair groaned under the weight of his armor. He placed his hands on the keyboard, and for a moment, simply observed the glowing screen. Then his psychic awareness expanded, flowing into the machine through the electrical currents, following the network. Connections outward like a predator tracking spoor. What he found confirmed his initial assessment. This world had achieved a level of information connectivity that was almost admirable in its scope, but utterly inadequate in its security. Every computer, every server, every database in this city and beyond was now open to him. Not through hacking in the traditional sense, but through the simple application of will upon the electromagnetic substrate that carried data. The Emperor's consciousness spread across the internet like fire through dry grass. Bank records, government files, corporate servers, personal emails, social media feeds, news archives. He consumed it all in seconds. His superhuman intellect processing information at speeds that would have reduced a normal human brain to ash. Patterns emerged, connections formed. The shape of this world's power structures became clear. Vought International. The name appeared everywhere, woven into the fabric of this society like a parasite that had convinced its host that they were symbiotic partners. The corporation controlled the soupes, manufactured them like products, marketed them to a public that had been conditioned to worship these artificial demigods. Behind the smiling faces and heroic marketing, the Emperor found a cesspool of corruption that made his ancient blood run cold. Compound Phi, the genetic serum that created Supes. The Emperor pulled up every file, every research document, every classified report. He absorbed chemical formulas, genetic sequences, trial results spanning decades. His mind, the same mind that had created the gene seed for 20 Space Marine legions, dissected the compound with contemptuous ease. Crude, horrifically crude, like watching a child play with matches while sitting on a powder keg. Compound V worked by introducing foreign genetic material into human cells, triggering random mutations that occasionally produced useful abilities. Random. The fools had created a genetic enhancement process that relied on chance, that produced unstable results, that gave powers without understanding or control. It was genetic modification by lottery. And the failures, the ones who died screaming or developed useless mutations, were simply swept under the rug. But beneath the crude application, the Emperor recognized something valuable. The base concept was sound. With proper understanding, with the knowledge he possessed, Compound 5 could be refined into something magnificent. Not perfect. Only the gene seed approached perfection, but far beyond what these corporate scientists had achieved. The Emperor's research expanded outward. He consumed files on every Supe Vought had created, cross-referencing their abilities with their genetic profiles. Patterns emerged. Homelander appeared repeatedly, the flagship product, the symbol of everything Vought represented. Flight, super strength, heat vision, near invulnerability. All packaged in the body of a man-child whose psychological profile read like a textbook on narcissistic psychopathy. Fascinating and horrifying. They had created the genetic equivalent of a demigod and then raised him in a laboratory, studying him like a specimen, denying him everything that might have shaped him into something worthy of his power. The Emperor had seen this before. Powerful beings warped by their circumstances into monsters. Some of his own sons, his Primarchs, had followed similar paths when circumstance and character aligned catastrophically. The difference was that the Primarchs had been scattered by chaos and raised in conditions beyond his control. Homelander had been deliberately manufactured this way, his psychological damage a feature rather than a bug. Because Vought needed a weapon that could be controlled through emotional manipulation rather than genuine loyalty. The Emperor's fist clenched, and the keyboard beneath his hands cracked like ice. He expanded his search to the government databases. What he found there was almost worse than Vought's corruption, complicity, cooperation. Entire departments dedicated to managing Supe-related incidents, covering up collateral damage, negotiating settlements with the families of victims. The government knew what Vought's heroes truly were, and they allowed it to continue because the alternative, admitting they had no control, was politically unacceptable. Weakness masquerading as pragmatism. The Emperor had no patience for either. His awareness brushed against military files, Defense Department assessments of Supe capabilities. They feared Homelander, feared him deeply and completely. Contingency plans existed for neutralizing him should he ever go rogue. But even the generals who authored those plans didn't believe they would work. Homelander was their single greatest strategic asset and their single greatest existential threat. Fools, all of them fools. They had created a weapon they couldn't control and then convinced themselves that marketing and public relations would keep that weapon pointed in the right direction. It was like building a fusion reactor with no containment system and hoping corporate branding would prevent a meltdown. The Emperor pulled back from the networks, his consciousness returning fully to his physical form. Around him, every computer terminal in the business center had activated, their screens displaying cascading data that would have been meaningless to any observer, but spoke volumes to him. In less than 10 minutes, he had learned more about this world than its own intelligence agencies had compiled in decades. and what he had learned demanded action. Outside, the situation was escalating. Through the windows, the Emperor could see the crowd had swollen to hundreds. Police had established a perimeter, though their body language betrayed their uncertainty. They were trained to handle criminals and crowd control, not golden armored beings who appeared from tears in reality. More importantly, he sensed the approach of additional supes, 3 of them, flying in formation from the northeast. His psychic awareness identified them before they came into view. Queen Maeve, Black Noir, and most significantly, Homelander himself. Vaught's premier assets, summoned to deal with the anomaly that had appeared in their city. The Emperor stood, his armor reflecting the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Let them come. Let this world's manufactured gods attempt to assert their authority. It would be educational for all involved. He walked to the window, looking out at the crowd, the police, the news cameras. Beyond them, 3 figures appeared in the sky, sunlight glinting off Homelander's ridiculous costume. The blonde Soupy was flying at the front, flanked by his teammates, projecting confidence and authority for the cameras below. The Emperor's expression didn't change, but something cold and predatory stirred in his gaze. Homelander had no idea what he was flying toward. None of them did. They were children playing dress-up, convinced that their corporate-granted powers made them special. They had never faced a true threat, never confronted something that could end them with the same casual ease one might swat an insect. That was about to change. The Emperor placed one hand against the window, and the glass trembled. His psychic might radiated outward, a pulse of authority that every Supe within 5 miles felt in their bones. It was a declaration, a challenge, and a warning all at once. I am here. I am beyond you. And I am not impressed. Homelander faltered mid-flight, his expression flickering from confident to confused for just a moment. Even through his narcissism and delusion, some part of him recognized that sensation, the feeling of encountering something genuinely superior for the first time in his life. The Emperor turned from the window and walked toward the stairs. The meeting would happen on his terms, in the open where the world could watch. Let them see what true power looked like. Let them understand that the age of manufactured heroes and corporate gods was ending. A new order was coming to this world, whether it was ready or not. The Emperor of Mankind descended to the lobby, his footsteps echoing like a countdown to inevitability. Behind him, every computer in the business center shut down simultaneously, their purpose served. He had the information he needed. Now came the more direct approach. The hotel's main entrance stood before him, glass doors reflecting his golden form. Beyond them, chaos and uncertainty. Beyond them, a world that thought it understood power. They would learn differently. The Emperor pushed open the doors and stepped out into the sunlight, and 3 of the 7's most powerful members descended from the sky to confront him. The crowd gasped, cameras focused. The world watched. And in that moment, standing beneath the afternoon sun with manufactured gods descending toward him, the Emperor of Mankind smiled. It was not a kind smile. Homelander descended like a god, gracing mortals with his presence, his cape billowing dramatically in the wind he himself created with his flight. Queen Maeve landed to his right, her armor gleaming, expression carefully neutral. Black Noir took position to his left, silent and menacing in his black tactical suit. The formation was calculated for maximum visual impact. Vaught's media team had spent years perfecting the choreography of superhero arrivals. The Emperor watched their descent with the detached interest of an entomologist observing insects. The crowd had swelled to over 1,000 now, held back by police barricades and their own survival instincts. News helicopters circled overhead like carrion birds, their cameras broadcasting this confrontation to millions. Social media was already exploding with speculation, theories, fear, and excitement. This was the kind of event that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Homelander touched down 20 feet from the Emperor, his boots producing a theatrical crack against the pavement. He straightened to his full height, shoulders back, projecting the confident authority that had made him America's favorite hero. His smile was perfect, practiced 10,000 times in mirrors and marketing meetings, calibrated to convey strength tempered with approachability. Well, Homelander said, his voice carrying that folksy American charm that tested so well with focus groups. Quite an entrance you made. Very dramatic. I appreciate the showmanship, really I do. But here's the thing, friend. His smile sharpened slightly. You can't just tear holes in reality over New York City without proper authorization. It's a safety issue, liability, you understand. The Emperor said nothing. His golden eyes swept over Homelander with the same intensity he might use to examine a flawed weapon on an assembly line. Every detail registered. The narcissistic posture, the barely contained aggression behind the smile, the way Homelander's hands clenched and unclenched unconsciously when not receiving the immediate deference he expected. I'm talking to you. Homelander's smile tightened. It's polite to respond when someone's being friendly. You are a mistake, the Emperor said. The words landed like a physical blow. Homelander's smile froze. Queen Maeve's eyes widened slightly. Even Black Noir's rigid posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Around them, the crowd's murmur died to absolute silence. Excuse me? Homelander's voice remained controlled, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. The Emperor took a single step forward. Just one step. But Homelander's body tensed as though preparing for an attack. Some part of him, the part that existed beneath the marketing and delusion, recognized threat on an instinctual level. A genetic experiment conducted by fools who understood neither the science they employed nor the consequences they would create. The Emperor continued, his voice carrying across the street with perfect clarity. They gave you power without purpose, strength without wisdom, and called it achievement. You are not a hero. You are not a god. You are a cautionary tale about what happens when capability is granted to those utterly unworthy of it. Homelander's jaw clenched. Red light began to glow faintly in his eyes, the telltale sign of heat vision building. You want to try that again? Maybe with a little more respect? Respect is earned through deed and character, the Emperor replied. You have neither. You are a child given a loaded weapon and convinced by sycophants that holding it makes you special. The truth is far simpler. You are a product, manufactured, marketed, controlled. The red glow in Homelander's eyes intensified. Queen Maeve shifted her weight, preparing to intervene. She had seen Homelander lose control before, had watched him hurt people when his ego was bruised. This stranger in golden armor was pushing every button Homelander had, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Homelander? Maeve said quietly, her voice carrying a warning. But Homelander wasn't listening anymore. His face had transformed from media-perfect charm to something raw and furious. You know what? I've had just about enough of your... He moved with superhuman speed, closing the distance between himself and the Emperor in a fraction of a second. His fist, capable of punching through steel, drove toward the Emperor's face with enough force to shatter concrete. The Emperor caught it. His gauntleted hand closed around Homelander's fist like a vice, stopping the blow with such absolute finality that the shockwave of displaced air washed over the crowd. Homelander's eyes widened in genuine shock. In his entire life, no one had stopped his punch. No one had even slowed it down. The physics of it didn't make sense. He could lift planes, throw cars like toys, and this armored stranger had simply caught him. Impossible, Homelander breathed. Improbable, the Emperor corrected. Not impossible. You lack the frame of reference to understand the difference. The Emperor's grip tightened, and Homelander heard something he had never heard before. The sound of his own bones beginning to crack under pressure. Pain, real, genuine pain, shot up his arm. He tried to pull away, but the Emperor's hold was absolute. Decades of Vought training, countless hours in combat simulations, all his genetic advantages, none of it mattered. He was held as firmly as if he'd been encased in concrete. "Let me explain something to you," the Emperor said, his voice dropping to a tone that made the surrounding crowd lean forward unconsciously despite their fear. "I have walked this universe for longer than your civilization has existed. I have created warriors who would consider you a minor inconvenience. I have conquered worlds, shattered empires, and bent the very fabric of reality to my will. You are not impressive. You are barely adequate." Homelander's heat vision fired in desperation. Twin beams of superheated energy struck the Emperor's face at point-blank range, energy sufficient to cut through steel, to melt concrete, to incinerate any normal human instantly. The beams washed over the Emperor's features like water over stone. Where they touched his skin, there was a faint glow, as though his flesh itself was radiating the energy back outward harmlessly. The Emperor didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the attack as anything more significant than a gentle breeze. When Homelander's heat vision finally sputtered out, the Emperor's face remained unmarked. "Is that all?" the Emperor asked. Then he moved. The Emperor released Homelander's fist and struck him in the chest with the flat of his palm. The impact was controlled, measured, not meant to kill, but to educate. Homelander's body launched backward, crossing the street in a blur and slamming into a parked car with enough force to crumple it like tissue paper. The vehicle's alarm began to wail before cutting off as electrical systems failed. Homelander struggled to rise, his perfect costume torn, blood trickling from his mouth. Real blood. His blood. The crowd stared in stunned disbelief. News anchors stammered, unable to process what they were witnessing. The impossible had occurred. Someone had hurt Homelander. Queen Maeve stepped forward, her sword drawn. "Stop. Whatever this is. Whatever you think you're proving. I am proving nothing," the Emperor interrupted, his eyes shifting to her. "I am stating facts. Your companion is not invincible. None of you are. You have been allowed to believe otherwise because this world lacks genuine threats. That era has ended." Black Noir moved with silent efficiency, throwing shuriken that should have embedded themselves in the Emperor's armor. Instead, they stopped in midair 3 feet from their target, suspended by invisible force. The Emperor gestured dismissively, and the blades dropped to the ground with metallic clatters. "Parlor tricks," the Emperor said. "Weapons designed for humans fighting humans. You have no conception of true warfare." Homelander rose from the wreckage of the car, his face twisted with rage and something he'd never felt before. Genuine fear. He was bleeding. He was hurt. And worst of all, he had given everything he had. His strongest punch, his heat vision at maximum intensity. And he might as well have been fighting a mountain. "What are you?" Homelander demanded, his voice raw. "I am what humanity could become if it were properly guided," the Emperor replied. "I am what your creators attempted to manufacture and failed. I am the master of mankind, and I have come to correct the mistakes that have been made in my absence." The Emperor's psychic presence expanded outward, washing over the crowd like a wave. Every person within 3 blocks felt it. A pressure against their minds, not hostile, but undeniably there. It was the sensation of standing before something vast and ancient, something that had forgotten more about power than humanity had ever learned. Police officers found their hands dropping unconsciously from their weapons. News camera operators forgot to adjust their focus. The crowd stood transfixed, unable to look away from the golden figure who spoke with such absolute authority. This world has suffered long enough under corporate gods and manufactured heroes, the Emperor continued, his voice carrying to every ear present and to millions watching through screens. You have been told that these supes are the best humanity can produce. You have been lied to. What you see before you, he gestured at Homelander, still struggling to recover, is what happens when genetic enhancement is treated as a profit center rather than humanity's sacred evolution. Homelander tried to fly, to escape, to regroup. His body lifted a few inches off the ground before the Emperor's will pressed down on him like an invisible hand. Homelander crashed back to the pavement, unable to overcome the psychic pressure holding him down. You will stay, the Emperor commanded. You will listen, and you will learn what it means to face something genuinely superior. Queen Maeve's sword lowered slightly. She had fought alongside Homelander for years, had seen him demolish threats with casual ease. Watching him struggle against this golden stranger rewrote everything she thought she knew about power hierarchies. If Homelander could be beaten, if he could be held down like a misbehaving child, then what did that mean for the rest of them? What do you want? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. I want what I have always wanted, the Emperor replied, his golden eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. Humanity's ascension, its proper evolution, its liberation from the chains of ignorance, corruption, and fear. This world has the foundation. Your compound V, crude as it is, proves that genetic enhancement is possible. What it lacks is proper implementation. He gestured broadly at the city around them. Look at what you have built. Towers of glass and steel, yes, but housing a civilization that worships corporate mascots and calls it heroism. Your governments are paralyzed by fear of their own creations. Your corporations profit from disasters they secretly cause. Your people live in terror of those meant to protect them. This is not progress. This is systematic degradation. The Emperor's voice dropped, becoming almost contemplative. I have seen this pattern before. Societies that reach a certain level of achievement and then stagnate, convinced they have reached their apex when they have barely scratched the surface of their potential. Without intervention, such civilizations collapse into chaos or calcify into irrelevance. He stepped toward Homelander, who flinched despite himself. But with proper guidance, with the knowledge I possess, humanity can be so much more. The genetic modifications that created you and your kind, refined, perfected, applied with wisdom rather than greed, could produce warriors and leaders worthy of the stars themselves. You're talking about eugenics, Queen Maeve said, her voice tight. Genetic engineering on a massive scale, that's what you have already done, the Emperor interrupted. The only difference is that I would do it correctly. Your compound V creates random mutations, unpredictable, unstable. Millions dead in failed trials that your corporate masters swept under classified documents. I would create deliberate improvements, controlled, purposeful, every human elevated according to their capacity and role. The crowd's murmur had returned, a mixture of fear and fascination. Some were already live-streaming their own interpretations, conspiracy theories forming in real time. Others simply stared, trying to process the implications of what this stranger was proposing. Homelander finally found his voice again. You're insane. You show up, beat down America's greatest hero on live television, and think that gives you the right to... Rights are irrelevant. The Emperor cut him off. I do not ask for permission to save humanity from itself. I simply act, as I have always acted, as I will continue to act until this world achieves its true potential or destroys itself, trying to resist. The Emperor turned to face the cameras directly, addressing the millions watching. This is not a negotiation. This is a declaration. The age of corporate heroes has ended. The age of systematic human advancement begins today. Those who align with this truth will be elevated. Those who oppose it will be removed. And those who stand in the middle, uncertain and afraid, will be given the knowledge necessary to make an informed choice. He paused, letting his words sink in. I am not your enemy. I am your shepherd. And whether you follow willingly or must be dragged toward your own salvation, that choice will determine how much this transition costs in blood and tears. The Emperor's gaze swept across the assembled soupes, the police, the crowd, the cameras. I suggest you choose wisely. Then, without another word, he rose into the air, through sheer force of will. No flight mechanism, no visible propulsion, simply the application of psychic might upon reality itself. He ascended vertically, his golden form catching the sunlight until he was a brilliant point against the blue sky. And then he was gone, vanishing between the towers of New York City, leaving behind a world that had just learned a terrifying truth. They were not at the top of the food chain anymore. Vought Tower's executive conference room occupied the 92nd floor, offering panoramic views of Manhattan that normally inspired confidence and superiority in those privileged enough to enter. Today, those windows felt less like symbols of achievement and more like cage bars. Stan Edgar sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone, watching the news footage for the 15th time. Around him, Vaught's crisis management team operated in controlled chaos, phones ringing, assistants whispering urgent updates, legal counsel frantically revising liability assessments. But Edgar's attention remained fixed on the screen, watching Homelander, their flagship product, their most valuable asset, get effortlessly dominated by a being that shouldn't exist. Play it again, Edgar commanded, the moment of contact. The footage rewound, Homelander's punch moving at superhuman speed, the golden figure catching it without apparent effort, the crack of bones, the heat vision washing harmlessly over unmarked skin. Then the casual strike that sent Homelander flying like a discarded toy. Enhance the impact point, Edgar said. The technical team zoomed in, slowing the footage to frame by frame. The Emperor's palm strike had been measured, controlled, not a wild swing, but surgical precision. The implication was clear. He could have hit harder, much harder. He had chosen to humiliate rather than kill. Analysis? Edgar asked, his voice betraying none of the cold calculation occurring behind his eyes. Ashley Barrett, VP of Hero Management, looked like she might be sick. Social media response is catastrophic. Homelander's favorability dropped 18 points in 2 hours. The hashtag Golden God is trending worldwide. Conservative estimates put viewer numbers at 400 million and climbing. Every major news network is running this on loop. I didn't ask about PR, Edgar said quietly. I asked for analysis. Who is he? What is he? Dr. Park, Vought's chief geneticist, cleared her throat nervously. We've run the footage through every database we have access to. Facial recognition returns nothing. Genetic markers, assuming we could get a sample, appear fully human from what we can analyze visually. But the capabilities... She trailed off, shaking her head. Sir, Nothing in our compound V research suggests that level of power is achievable. Homelander represents the absolute peak of what we've managed to create. This individual treated him like he was ordinary. Then our research is inadequate, Edgar stated. It wasn't a question or an accusation, simply a fact to be acknowledged and corrected. There's more, Dr. Park continued. When he spoke, the part about genetic enhancement being crude and random mutations, he wasn't speculating. He was describing our exact methodology in terms that suggest intimate familiarity with genetic engineering at a level far beyond current Earth science. He knows what compound V is. He knows how it works, and he knows how to improve it. The implications hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Madeline Stillwell, recently promoted to Senior VP of Marketing, leaned forward. What if we could negotiate with him? Offer a partnership? If he genuinely possesses knowledge that could refine Compound V, make it stable and controllable, the profit potential would be... He's not interested in profit. Edgar interrupted. Did you listen to his speech? He's interested in humanity's ascension, in systematic human advancement. That's not the language of someone looking to license patents. That's messianic language, ideological language, which makes him far more dangerous than someone motivated by money. Then what do we do? Ashley asked, her voice rising slightly. He humiliated Homelander on international television. Every rival, every competitor, every two-bit soupe with delusions of grandeur is going to see that footage and think they can challenge us now. Our entire business model depends on Homelander being perceived as unstoppable. Edgar's fingers steepled beneath his chin. Our business model, he said slowly, was always predicated on being the only source of genuine superhuman capability. That monopoly no longer exists. So we adapt. We always adapt. He stood, walking to the window. Somewhere out there in the city, the golden figure had disappeared after his dramatic exit. Vanished without a trace despite every satellite, drone, and surveillance system searching for him. That level of stealth suggested either advanced technology or abilities that operated outside conventional detection methods. Summon the 7, Edgar commanded. All of them. I don't care what they're doing. Get them here within the hour. Even Homelander? Ashley asked nervously. He's at the medical wing. The damage to his hand, the cracked ribs. Especially Homelander, Edgar said. He needs to understand that today's failure wasn't personal. It was educational. We've been operating under the assumption that we created the pinnacle of human enhancement. We were wrong. Now we know there's something higher on the food chain, and that knowledge makes us stronger, not weaker. While Vought scrambled to contain the fallout, 40 blocks north, Billy Butcher watched the same footage in a cramped apartment that served as the boys' current safe house. The television screen flickered, showing the Emperor's declaration on repeat. Around him, his team processed what they'd witnessed with varying degrees of shock and opportunistic calculation. Well, Frenchie said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. That was certainly something. That was biblical, Mother's Milk corrected, his voice tight. Did you see what he did to Homelander? Just caught him, like catching a baseball. Huey Campbell sat on the couch, his face pale. He could have killed him. That strike, if he'd wanted to, he could have punched straight through Homelander's chest. But he didn't. He just sent a message. Yeah, and what a bloody message, Butcher said, his London accent thickening with dark amusement. Turns out our favorite cape-wearing psychopath ain't top of the food chain after all. There's always a bigger fish in it. Kimiko, silent as always, gestured at the screen and then made a braking motion with her hands, her expression questioning. Kimiko wants to know if we can use this. Frenchie translated. If this golden man could be ally, enemy of Homelander is friend of ours, perhaps. Butcher's jaw tightened. Or he's worse. Listen to what he said. Systematic human advancement. Genetic modifications applied with wisdom. That's eugenics talk wrapped in pretty golden armor. He might hate Vought's version of soups, but he's proposing something that could be even more terrifying. A world where someone with his power decides who gets enhanced and who doesn't. Who's worthy and who gets left behind. But he hurt Homelander, Huey protested. That's good, right? Someone finally showed the world that Homelander isn't invincible. Hitler hurt Stalin, Butcher shot back. Didn't make him the good guy. Enemy of my enemy is sometimes just another enemy with better PR. Mother's Milk stood, pacing the small room. We need more information. Who is he? Where did he come from? What does he actually want? Because right now, all we know is there's a new player on the board who can slap Homelander around like a misbehaving child. And we have no idea what his endgame is. Actually, a new voice said from the doorway, I might be able to help with that. The boys spun toward the entrance, hands reaching for weapons. A woman stood there, mid-30s, professional attire, expensive shoes now covered in dust from climbing their building's fire escape. She held her hands up in a placating gesture. Easy, she said. I'm not here to fight. I'm here because we have a common problem, and I think I know something about your golden god that Vought doesn't. Who the hell are you? Butcher demanded, a crowbar appearing in his hand. Dr. Samantha Vogelbaum, she replied. Daughter of Jonah Vogelbaum, Vought's former chief scientist. My father helped create Homelander, and before he died, he told me stories about his earlier research, experiments that Vought buried because they were too dangerous. Experiments involving beings that weren't quite human, beings with capabilities that made Compound Vi look like children's vitamins. She stepped fully into the room, her expression grave. When I saw that footage, saw what he did to Homelander, I recognized the pattern. The way he moved, the casual authority, the genetic engineering knowledge he referenced. My father's notes mentioned something called the Progenitor Project, an attempt to reverse engineer enhancement from a single anomalous blood sample they acquired in 1952. They never succeeded, but the sample's properties suggested whoever it came from was operating on a completely different biological framework. And you think Golden Boy out there is connected to this? Butcher asked skeptically. I think he might be what Vought was trying to copy all along, Dr. Vogelbaum replied. I think Compound V wasn't an invention. It was a failed attempt at replication. And now the original has shown up to see what we've done with his stolen genetic material. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them like a shroud. Well, Butcher finally said, his voice dark with grim humor. That's just bloody perfect, innit? We've been fighting knockoffs while the genuine article was out there somewhere. And now he's here, he's pissed, and he's got opinions about how things should be run. So what do we do? Huey asked. Butcher's grin was sharp and humorless. What we always do, mate. We find the truth, we exploit the weakness, and we make sure that when the dust settles, humanity's still standing without any golden gods or corporate soups telling us how to live. He turned to Dr. Vogelbaum. You got your father's research? These notes about the Progenitor Project? She nodded. Everything Vought didn't confiscate. It's incomplete, but it might give us leverage. Then welcome to the boys, Butcher said. Hope you've got a strong stomach, because things are about to get properly weird. Across the city, in an abandoned warehouse that hadn't appeared on any property registry in 30 years, the Emperor of Mankind stood before a makeshift laboratory. In the hours since his confrontation with Homelander, he had been busy. The building's interior had been transformed. Equipment scavenged from a dozen sources, arranged with geometric precision, humming with jury-rigged power that shouldn't have been possible with the components used. But the Emperor had built civilizations from less. On a metal table before him lay several vials of compound phi, acquired through methods that would horrify Vought's security team. He studied the amber liquid with the intensity of someone reading scripture written in a forgotten language. His hands moved with practiced precision, running tests that 21st century science wouldn't develop for another century. Pathetic, he murmured, watching the genetic markers destabilize under observation. They found the key and used it to open a storage closet when they could have unlocked kingdoms. But beneath the contempt, he recognized potential. The base concept of compound phi, introducing controlled genetic modification through viral vectors, was sound. It was the execution that failed. Random mutations, uncontrolled expression, no targeting of specific enhancement pathways, like using a sledgehammer when delicate surgical instruments were required. With his knowledge, with the genetic engineering principles he had perfected over millennia, he could refine this crude serum into something magnificent. Not as perfect as Astartes' gene seed, that remained his greatest achievement, but something that could elevate baseline humanity to heights these corporate fools never imagined. The question was whether this world deserved such a gift. The Emperor's mind reached out psychically, touching the minds of millions across the city. Most were consumed with fear, speculation, religious fervor. Some saw him as a threat to be destroyed, others as a messiah to be worshipped. Both groups fundamentally missed the point. He was neither destroyer nor savior. He was architect. And every worthwhile structure required a foundation strong enough to bear its weight. His psychic awareness brushed against something unexpected, a cluster of minds discussing him with unusual clarity. Not the panicked thoughts of civilians or the calculating schemes of corporate executives. These were minds actively seeking to understand him, to find leverage, to resist. Interesting. The Emperor allowed himself a slight smile. Good. He needed opposition, not because it posed any genuine threat, but because resistance revealed character. Those who accepted his authority without question were sheep, useful only for following. Those who challenged him, who questioned, who fought, they were the raw material from which something greater could be forged. Let them come. Let them investigate, plot, and scheme. Let them believe they could find weakness where none existed. Every failed attempt would teach them a valuable lesson. Some forces could not be opposed, only joined or avoided. And those who learned that lesson would be given the opportunity to stand beside him as humanity took its first real steps toward greatness. The Emperor returned his attention to the vials of Compound 5, his mind already designing improvements, calculating formulas, planning the systematic elevation of an entire species, whether they wanted it or not. The game had begun. The pieces were moving into position, and the Emperor of Mankind, as always, was prepared to play the long game. After all, he had nothing but time. The seven assembled in Vought Tower's briefing room with none of their usual swagger. Even the room itself seemed diminished. The propaganda posters featuring their smiling faces now felt like mockeries, reminders of a hierarchy that had been shattered on live television. Homelander sat at the head of the table, his hand wrapped in bandages that shouldn't have been necessary. Compound V granted him regeneration that could heal most injuries within hours. But the damage the Emperor had inflicted went deeper than broken bones. His metacarpals had been crushed with such precision that the fracture patterns formed geometric shapes. a deliberate message written in his own skeletal structure. The medical team called it impossible. Homelander called it humiliating. Queen Maeve watched him carefully, noting the way his jaw clenched, the muscle twitching beneath his eye. She had seen Homelander angry before, had watched him laser innocent people when his ego was bruised. But this was different. This was the rage of someone who had encountered a fundamental truth about the universe that contradicted everything they believed about themselves. The Deep fidgeted with his phone, replaying footage of the confrontation. Black Noir stood motionless in the corner, his body language giving away nothing. Starlight, the newest member, looked between her teammates with growing unease, sensing tensions she didn't fully understand. A-Train arrived last, moving with uncharacteristic caution. The psychic paralysis the Emperor had imposed had worn off after several hours, but the memory lingered like phantom pain. He had stood frozen while his body screamed at him to move, utterly helpless, reduced to a statue by a being who hadn't even looked at him twice. Stan Edgar entered without preamble, Ashley Barrett trailing behind him with a tablet and an expression of barely contained panic. "Gentlemen, ladies," Edgar began, his voice carrying its usual measured calm. "We have a situation that requires immediate strategic assessment. As you're all aware, an unknown entity has appeared in New York City and publicly challenged our organizational structure. Let's discuss our response." "Our response?" Homelander's voice was tight. "Our response is, I go back out there and finish what he started. You think I'm going to let some golden freak humiliate me on international television and just... You'll do exactly what you're told." Edgar interrupted, his tone never rising but carrying absolute authority. "Which is precisely what you were doing when he broke 3 of your fingers." The room went silent. Homelander's eyes began to glow red, but Edgar didn't flinch. After a moment that stretched like pulled wire, the glow faded. Homelander looked away. "Good," Edgar continued. "Now that we've established that emotional responses won't serve us, let's discuss what we actually know. Dr. Park?" The geneticist stepped forward, displaying holographic data above the conference table. Analysis of the confrontation reveals several key points. First, the entity demonstrates strength and durability that exceed Homelander's by a significant margin. Not marginally superior, significantly superior. The ease with which he caught and crushed Homelander's hand suggests he was operating well below his maximum capacity. Homelander's jaw tightened further, but he said nothing. Second, Dr. Park continued, his healing factor or durability rendered Homelander's heat vision completely ineffective. We calculate that those beams were operating at approximately 15,000 degrees Celsius. Human tissue, even enhanced tissue, should have vaporized. His didn't, which means either his cellular structure is fundamentally different from anything Compound V produces, or he possesses active defensive capabilities we don't understand. "What about the psychic abilities?" Maeve asked. "The way he held A-Train in place, the pressure everyone felt when he did whatever he did." "Confirmed psychic capabilities," Dr. Park nodded. "Multiple witnesses reported feeling a presence in their minds, not invasive, but undeniably there. A-Train's paralysis was achieved without physical contact, suggesting remote neural manipulation or a localized field effect that interrupted voluntary muscle control. Either way, it demonstrates abilities that no Compound V variant has ever produced. So he's stronger, tougher, and has mind powers," the Deep summarized. "Great, fantastic. What's the plan? Because if someone like that decides to start taking things, territory, resources, whatever, who's going to stop him?" "That's the critical question," Edgar said, his fingers steepled. Which is why we're not going to try to stop him. We're going to negotiate with him. Negotiate? Homelander's voice dripped with contempt. He humiliated your flagship product in front of the world, and you want to negotiate? I want to survive, Edgar corrected. And so should you. Everything I've built, everything Vought represents, depends on being the sole source of superhuman capability. That monopoly is now contested. Fighting a war we might lose serves no one. But if we can bring him into the organization, make him part of our structure rather than an external threat. You want to hire him? Starlight said, disbelief coloring her words. After what he did, you want to offer him a contract? I want to offer him what everyone wants. Purpose, resources, and recognition, Edgar replied. He spoke of humanity's advancement, of systematic genetic improvement. That suggests a goal, an ideology. Ideologies can be co-opted. Goals can be redirected. If we position Vought as the mechanism through which his vision can be realized, we convert a threat into an asset. And if he refuses? Black Noir's voice emerged from his mask, rare and rasping. Then we implement contingency protocols, Edgar said. But negotiation is always cheaper than warfare. And based on what we've seen, warfare with this entity would be catastrophic for everyone involved. Ashley pulled up additional data. Social media analysis shows a 63% favorable response to his appearance. The narrative is already forming. Mysterious, powerful being challenges corrupt system, speaks truth to power. We're losing the PR war before it even fully begins. If we attack him now, we look like the villains protecting our monopoly. Because we are, Maeve said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. What? She continued, meeting their stares. Are we pretending we don't know what Vought does? What we do? He called us corporate mascots, and he wasn't wrong. We've been complicit in covering up collateral damage, protecting our image while people die. Maybe someone challenging that system isn't the worst thing in the world. Careful, Maeve. Edgar's voice carried a warning. That kind of thinking is dangerous. So is ignoring reality, she shot back. I was there. I saw what he did to Homelander, and I saw something else he held back. That strike could have been lethal, and it wasn't. He could have killed all three of us in seconds, and he chose not to. That means something. It means he's playing a game, Homelander snarled, making a point. But games have rules, and rules can be broken. Then break them, Edgar said calmly. Go out there, find him, and break all the rules you want. See how it works out for you. I'll have your memorial service pre-planned for efficiency. The silence that followed was arctic. We negotiate, Edgar said with finality. Ashley, prepare a press release. We're inviting our mysterious visitor to a formal discussion about the future of enhanced individuals in modern society. Frame it as Vought, extending an olive branch to a powerful new player. Make it public enough that refusing would look like cowardice on his part. And if he shows up? A-Train asked nervously. Then we offer him what he wants, Edgar replied. Access to our research, our resources, our global infrastructure. We make him believe that working with Vought is the most efficient path to his stated goals. We compromise, we accommodate, and we survive. And if we can't give him what he wants? Starlight pressed. Edgar's expression remained neutral, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then we discover whether Vought's experimental weapons division has anything that can actually hurt him. But I'd rather not find out the answer to that question unless absolutely necessary. While Vought strategized, the Emperor stood atop the Chrysler Building, his golden armor catching the late afternoon sun. The Art Deco spire stretched beneath him, a monument to an age when humanity still attempted genuine artistry in its construction. From this vantage point, he could see the entire city. 8 million souls going about their lives, most still processing the day's events. His psychic awareness expanded outward like a radar pulse, touching minds throughout the metropolitan area. Fear, curiosity, hope, anger, the full spectrum of human emotional response to the unknown. Some prayed to him already, their minds desperate for salvation from beings like Homelander. Others plotted against him, convinced he represented an invasion to be repelled. Both groups would be disappointed. The Emperor was neither savior nor invader. He was evolutionary pressure given physical form, a force that would push this civilization toward its potential, whether it wanted to evolve or not. His attention focused on a particular cluster of minds, 40 blocks north. The boys and their new ally, Dr. Vogelbaum. They were examining research notes, discussing something called the Progenitor Project. Interesting. So Vought had acquired genetic material in 1952. Given the timeline and his own activities during that period, he could guess whose blood they had stolen. The fools had tried to reverse engineer godhood from a single sample and created Compound V instead. A crude facsimile that produced random powers rather than systematic enhancement. Like trying to recreate a symphony after hearing a single note. But their failure proved useful. It meant this world already had infrastructure for genetic modification, public acceptance of enhanced individuals, and established distribution networks. With proper refinement, Vought's existing systems could be repurposed to serve actual progress rather than corporate profit. The question was whether he should work with them or through them. Movement caught his attention, not physical movement, but psychic. Someone was trying to find him, reaching out with mental abilities that were impressive by this world's standards, but laughably crude by his. The Emperor followed the psychic thread back to its source. A woman, mid-20s, sitting in a basement apartment surrounded by occult paraphernalia and mystical texts. A psychic, then, and a trained one at that. Rare in this universe, where the Imperium barely touched reality. She was genuinely gifted, her mind capable of perceiving dimensions that most humans couldn't access. The Emperor reached back along the connection, his psychic presence making contact with hers. The woman gasped, her body going rigid. Her name flooded into his consciousness along with her surface thoughts. Mesmer, a former Supi who had worked for Vought before being cast aside when her powers became inconvenient to the corporate structure. Now she worked as an unlicensed psychic, helping those the system had failed. Who? What are you? Her mental voice trembled with awe and terror. I am what you have been searching for, the Emperor replied directly into her mind. A being who understands the potential of psychic gifts and the tragedy of seeing them wasted. Your mind, she stammered mentally. It's like staring into the sun. I can barely perceive the edges of your consciousness. What are you? I am the Emperor of mankind, and you, Mesmer, are going to help me understand the full scope of this world's enhanced population. Not because I compel you, but because you recognize that the current system has failed people like yourself. He felt her resistance, her trained caution warring with curiosity. Good. He respected those who didn't immediately submit. What do you want from me? She asked. Information, perspective, the truth about what Vought does to Supes who don't fit their marketing demographics. In exchange, I will teach you to properly wield the gifts you possess. Your psychic abilities are nascent, barely trained. I can show you how to develop them beyond anything you've imagined. And the price? No price, only a choice. Stand with me as humanity evolves, or stand aside as I reshape this world with or without your cooperation. But know this: I have examined your memories, your past, the things Vought did to you when you were no longer profitable. They will face accounting for those crimes. The only question is whether you wish to witness it. Mesmer's mental presence flickered with old pain, buried rage, and desperate hope. If you're lying, then you will know within minutes of meeting me, the Emperor interrupted. I am many things, but I am not a liar. Deception is for those who lack the power to enforce truth. He felt her decision crystallize. Where do I find you? You don't. I will find you when the time is appropriate. For now, continue your work. Help those the system discards. And when I call, be ready to tell me everything you know about Vaught's failures. The Emperor severed the connection, his mind returning fully to his physical form atop the Chrysler building. Another piece positioned on the board. Another ally recruited not through force, but through understanding what motivated them. This was how empires were built, not through conquest alone, but through offering people something they desperately wanted and could only receive by joining your cause. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The Emperor watched the light fade, his ancient mind calculating possibilities, planning contingencies, preparing for the confrontation that would inevitably come. Vought would reach out. Of that he was certain. They would offer partnership, resources, compromise. And he would accept, not because he needed what they offered, but because infiltrating their organization from within was more efficient than destroying it from without. Let them believe they were negotiating with him. Let them think they had leverage. The truth would reveal itself in time. The Emperor of Mankind did not negotiate. He simply allowed lesser beings to feel involved, while he reshaped reality according to his design. The city lights began to flicker on below. Millions of bulbs pushing back the darkness. Beautiful in its way. Humanity's eternal war against the night. They built towers and lit fires and pretended they had conquered fear. The Emperor would teach them differently. Fear was appropriate when facing the unknown, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to rise above limitation, to evolve beyond weakness, to become something greater than what they were. Whether they rose to meet that challenge or broke beneath its weight would determine the shape of their future. And the Emperor, as always, was prepared for either outcome. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. the following morning. Prime television hours, maximum global audience. Vaught's PR machine had worked through the night, crafting a narrative that positioned the corporation as forward-thinking peacemakers, extending a hand to a mysterious new player. Ashley Barrett stood before the assembled media, flanked by Homelander and Queen Maeve, both looking considerably more composed than they had during yesterday's confrontation. Vought International has always been committed to fostering dialogue between enhanced individuals and society at large, Ashley began, reading from prepared remarks with practiced sincerity. Yesterday's events, while dramatic, represent an opportunity rather than a crisis. We formally extend an invitation to our visitor to meet with us, to discuss how his considerable abilities might contribute to making the world a safer place. A reporter from CNN raised her hand. Ms. Barrett, considerable abilities seems like an understatement. Homelander is widely considered the most powerful supe in existence, and this individual defeated him in less than a minute. Should the public be concerned? Homelander's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his media-trained composure. Ashley smoothly deflected. What we witnessed was a misunderstanding, not a defeat. Homelander approached with caution appropriate for an unknown entity, and the encounter ended without serious casualties. That shows restraint on both sides. The footage shows Homelander's heat vision having no effect, another reporter pressed. It shows him being physically dominated. How is that not a defeat? Before Ashley could respond, the air in the conference room changed. It wasn't a dramatic shift, no thundercrack or flash of light. Simply a sudden awareness that someone new occupied the space. Every head turned toward the back of the room, where the Emperor of Mankind stood as though he had always been there. Security guards reached for weapons. Cameras swung toward him. Homelander's eyes began to glow red before Stan Edgar's hand touched his shoulder in warning. "You invited me?" the Emperor said, his voice carrying easily across the room without being raised. It would be discourteous to refuse. He walked forward through the crowd of reporters, who parted instinctively, creating a corridor. Each step resonated with that same otherworldly authority, a presence that made even hardened journalists feel like children in the presence of something vast and unknowable. The Emperor's golden armor caught the stage lights, transforming him into something that belonged in mythology rather than a corporate press conference. Ashley's prepared remarks evaporated from her mind. She stood frozen, microphone hanging limply in her hand, as the Emperor ascended to the stage with measured grace. "I accept your invitation to discuss terms," the Emperor said, addressing Stan Edgar directly as though the cameras and reporters didn't exist. "Though I suspect we have different understandings of what those terms entail." Edgar, to his credit, recovered quickly. "Then perhaps we should continue this conversation in private." "My office—" "No," the Emperor interrupted. "You made this invitation public, performed it before cameras and crowds. The discussion will remain public. This world deserves to hear what comes next without corporate editing." He turned to face the assembled media, his golden eyes sweeping across them with an intensity that made several reporters step backward involuntarily. "You asked if you should be concerned," the Emperor addressed the CNN reporter directly. "The answer is yes, but not because of me. You should be concerned because your society has accepted a fundamentally broken system. You worship manufactured gods who possess power without wisdom, strength without purpose. You allow corporations to create weapons disguised as heroes, and then act surprised when those weapons malfunction. That's..." Ashley started to object, but the Emperor's raised hand silenced her without a word. "I reviewed your organization's files," he continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "Every database, every classified document, every buried report. I know about the Compound V trials that killed thousands. I know about the soups you created and then disposed of when they proved unprofitable. I know about the collateral damage you cover up, the victims you silence, the evidence you destroy. All of it." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Ashley looked to Edgar for guidance, but the CEO's expression remained carefully neutral, calculating how much damage control would be needed. "These are serious allegations," Edgar said calmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Allegations without evidence are just conspiracy theories." The Emperor gestured, and every screen in the room, monitors, phones, cameras, simultaneously displayed the same image. Classified vote documents marked with dates, casualty numbers, and cover-up protocols. Financial records showing payoffs to victims' families. Medical reports on failed Compound V trials. Internal memos discussing acceptable levels of civilian casualties during SUPI operations. The journalists went silent, reading frantically, recording everything. "Evidence," the Emperor said simply. "From your own servers. I could spend hours detailing every crime, every death, every lie. But time is precious. So instead, I will make my position clear. Vought International has proven itself unworthy of the responsibility it claims. This organization will be restructured or it will be removed. Those are the only options." "You can't just..." Ashley stammered. I can, the Emperor interrupted. And I will. The question is whether you cooperate with the restructuring or resist it. Cooperation will be far less painful for everyone involved. Homelander stepped forward, his composure cracking. You think you can just walk in here, throw around accusations, and take over our company? We have legal rights. We have the government. You have nothing, the Emperor said, his voice dropping to a tone that made the temperature in the room seem to plummet. You have power granted by a corporation that can be dismantled. You have legal protections provided by governments I could influence with minimal effort. You have the illusion of importance, carefully cultivated but fundamentally hollow. He stepped closer to Homelander, and despite himself, despite the cameras and witnesses, Homelander retreated a step. I broke your hand yesterday, the Emperor continued. I did so not to prove my superiority, that requires no proof, but to teach you a lesson you desperately needed to learn. You are not special. You are a product, and products can be recalled, refurbished, or discarded. The choice of which path you follow belongs to you. Is that a threat? Homelander's voice shook slightly. It's a fact, the Emperor replied. Threats are for those who need to convince others of their power. I simply state reality and allow you to adapt accordingly. Queen Maeve, who had been silent until now, spoke up. What exactly do you want? You talk about restructuring, about humanity's advancement. But what does that actually mean? What's your endgame? The Emperor turned to her, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Finally, a worthwhile question. What I want is what I have always wanted. Humanity reaching its full potential. Not this perverted version where power is randomly distributed to create celebrities and weapons, but systematic enhancement that elevates the entire species. He addressed the cameras directly now, speaking to the millions watching worldwide. You have been told that soups are special cases, genetic anomalies, lucky lottery winners who received extraordinary gifts. That is a lie designed to maintain scarcity and corporate control. The truth is simpler. Enhancement is possible for all humans. Compound V proves this, despite its crude implementation. With proper refinement, with the knowledge I possess, every person could be elevated beyond their current limitations. That's impossible, Dr. Park said, emerging from behind the stage curtain where Vought's technical team monitored. Compound V's success rate is less than 30%, even under ideal conditions. Universal enhancement would require understanding that you lack, the Emperor finished. I have created warriors stronger than your Homelander, faster than your A-Train, more durable than any supe your compound has produced. I have done so not randomly, but systematically, with purpose and precision. Your compound V fails because it introduces chaos. Mine would introduce order. A reporter from the Times raised his hand. You're talking about genetic modification on a global scale. That's eugenics. That's evolution, the Emperor interrupted. Natural evolution is random, wasteful, cruel. Directed evolution is purposeful, efficient, and ultimately more humane. You fear it because you've been conditioned to associate genetic enhancement with historical atrocities. But those atrocities occurred because flawed humans attempted to define superiority through prejudice rather than objective improvement. I offer something different. Enhancement based not on race, religion, or arbitrary characteristics, but on role and aptitude. Who decides? Maeve pressed. Who determines what roles someone fills? What aptitude they're allowed to develop? You? Initially, yes, the Emperor said without hesitation. Because I possess the knowledge and experience necessary to make those determinations correctly. In time, as humanity evolves, as understanding spreads, the process becomes self-perpetuating. But someone must architect the foundation. Someone must ensure the structure is sound before others build upon it. You're describing a dictatorship, a reporter from The Guardian accused. Ruled by a single individual who claims to know what's best for everyone. I'm describing leadership, the Emperor corrected. True leadership, not the theatrical performance your society has mistaken for governance. Your democracies are paralyzed by competing interests. Your corporations pursue profit over progress. Your people live in fear while their supposed protectors exploit them. This is not a system worth preserving. Stan Edgar, who had been silently calculating throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Let's say, hypothetically, that Vought were willing to cooperate with your restructuring. What would that cooperation look like? The Emperor turned his full attention to Edgar, and for a moment, the CEO felt what it was like to be truly seen. Every calculation, every hidden motive, every carefully constructed persona stripped away and examined. You would provide access to your research facilities, your distribution networks, your global infrastructure, the Emperor said. I would provide the knowledge necessary to refine Compound 5 into something worthy of its potential. Together, we would begin systematic enhancement of humanity, starting with those most capable of handling the responsibility. And who determines capability? Edgar asked. I do, the Emperor stated. For now, as I said, someone must architect the foundation. Once established, once proven, the system becomes self-evident. What happens to those who refuse enhancement? A reporter called out. Do they get left behind? Eliminated? They are allowed to live as they choose, the Emperor replied. But they will not be permitted to obstruct those who pursue advancement. The right to refuse evolution does not grant the right to prevent others from evolving. Those who wish to remain baseline human may do so. They will simply watch as humanity ascends around them. Homelander's fists clenched. You're insane. You Here, throw around these ridiculous ideas about reshaping humanity and expect us to just go along with it? I expect nothing, the Emperor said. I will proceed regardless of your cooperation. The question is whether Vought wishes to be part of humanity's advancement or an obstacle to be removed. Mr. Edgar understands this. That's why he invited me here. Not to negotiate, but to determine how best to survive the coming change. Edgar's expression revealed nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or respect for being understood so completely. You can't just restructure global society on your own authority, Ashley protested weakly. The UN, NATO, world governments, they'll never allow it. They will have no choice, the Emperor said. Do you think your primitive militaries could stop me? Your nuclear weapons? I have faced weapons that would reduce your entire arsenal to irrelevant noise. I walked among humanity when your nations were just tribal settlements. I have built empires that spanned galaxies. You have no leverage. You have only the choice of how you respond to inevitability. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, too overwhelmed by the implications of what they were hearing. The Emperor scanned the room one final time. I will give you 72 hours. In that time, Mr. Edgar will decide whether Vought cooperates or resists. Homelander will decide whether he evolves beyond his current limitations or remains a cautionary tale. The rest of you, he addressed the cameras, the watching world, will decide whether you embrace the future I offer or cling to a present built on fear and exploitation. He turned and began walking toward the exit. Wait, Maeve called out. If we agree to this, if Vought cooperates, what guarantee do we have that you won't just discard us once you have what you need? How do we trust you? The Emperor paused, looking back over his shoulder. For the first time, something resembling approval entered his expression. You don't trust me, he said. Trust is earned through action, not words. Watch what I do in the next 72 hours. Watch how I treat those who cooperate versus those who resist. Then make your decision based on evidence rather than fear. And if we resist? Edgar asked. Then you'll discover why I am called the Emperor of Mankind, he replied. And you'll understand why even gods learn to fear me. With that, he walked through the door and vanished into the city, leaving behind a press conference in complete chaos and a world that would never be the same. In the aftermath, as reporters frantically filed stories and Vought executives scrambled to assess the damage, one truth became inescapable. The age of corporate-controlled supes was ending. Something far older, far more powerful, and far more certain of its purpose had arrived. And it was offering humanity a choice it couldn't refuse. The Pentagon Situation Room filled with grim faces within 2 hours of the press conference. Joint Chiefs, intelligence directors, the Secretary of Defense, and representatives from every alphabet agency that mattered sat around the table, watching the footage replay for the 100th time. On the screens, the Emperor's words echoed with uncomfortable finality. Your primitive militaries could stop me? Your nuclear weapons? General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, rubbed his temples. Assessment? Catastrophic, replied Director Chen of the CIA. In less than 48 hours, this individual has appeared from nowhere, physically dominated our most powerful asset, infiltrated every database in Vought's network, and publicly threatened to restructure global society. And we have zero actionable intelligence on how to stop him. We have options, argued General Hutchins from Strategic Command. Tactical nuclear strike, orbital kinetic bombardment, enhanced weaponry designed specifically for supe neutralization, all of which failed against Homelander's heat vision. Morrison interrupted, which this entity tanked at point-blank range without visible damage. You want to authorize a nuclear strike in Manhattan based on the hope that he can't survive it? We can't just do nothing, Hutchins protested. We also can't start a war we'll lose, Morrison countered. Did you listen to his speech? He's not demanding territory or resources. He's offering to improve humanity. From a PR standpoint, attacking him makes us look like we're defending the corrupt system he's exposing. Director Chen leaned forward. The leaked Vought documents are genuine. We've verified the sources. Everything he said about Compound V trials, cover-ups, casualties, it's all true. And now the world knows. Vought's stock has dropped 40%. Protests are forming outside their offices globally. He weaponized the truth, and we can't counter-strike against facts. What about international cooperation? Asked the Secretary of Defense. NATO, the UN, a coordinated global response? China and Russia are already reaching out to him, Chen reported grimly. Private channels offering cooperation if he shares his genetic enhancement technology. They're not stupid. If this Emperor is even half as capable as he claims, whoever allies with him first gains an insurmountable strategic advantage. The room fell silent as that reality settled over them. So, what do we do? Morrison asked quietly. We wait, Chen said. He gave us 72 hours. Let's see what he does with that time. If he's genuinely interested in cooperation rather than conquest, we might be able to negotiate terms that protect American interests. If he's lying, we'll know soon enough. And if he's telling the truth? Hutchins pressed. If he really can elevate all of humanity, what then? No one had an answer to that question. In a safe house in Brooklyn, the boys gathered around a television showing news coverage of the press conference. The media was in complete meltdown. Every channel offering different interpretations, different theories, different levels of panic. "Well," Butcher said, breaking the stunned silence. That was properly mental. "He just declared war on the entire system," Mother's Milk said, disbelief coloring his words. "On live television, in front of the whole world." "Not war," Huey corrected, rewinding the footage. "He offered cooperation. Restructuring, not destruction. There's a difference." "Is there?" Frenchie asked, lighting another cigarette with shaking hands. "He says, cooperate or be removed. That sounds like war with polite language." Dr. Vogelbaum had been silent throughout, her face pale as she studied the Emperor's every word and gesture. "He knows about the progenitor project," she said finally. "When he mentioned creating warriors, being around for tens of thousands of years, he was describing what my father's notes theorized. They thought the blood sample came from something ancient, something that predated modern humanity." "You're saying he's been around since before civilization?" Mother's Milk asked skeptically. "I'm saying the genetic markers in that sample were so advanced, they couldn't have evolved naturally. Not in the time frame human civilization has existed. My father believed whoever donated that blood was either artificially enhanced by something beyond our understanding, or was the template from which humanity itself evolved." The room absorbed that information with varying degrees of belief. "So what's his game?" Butcher demanded. "He shows up, beats down Homelander, dumps Vaught's dirty laundry, and offers to turn everyone into super soldiers. Why? What does he gain?" "Maybe nothing," Huey suggested quietly. "Maybe he genuinely believes he's helping." "Nobody that powerful does anything genuinely helpful," Butcher shot back. "There's always an angle, always a price." Kimiko gestured at the screen, then made a questioning motion toward Dr. Vogelbaum. "Kimiko wants to know if we can analyze him," Frenchie translated. "Get a sample, understand his biology, find a weakness." "Even if we could get close enough to collect a sample," Dr. Vogelbaum said, "the equipment needed to analyze something that advanced doesn't exist. My father tried for decades with just the blood sample. He barely scratched the surface." "Then we work with what we know," Butcher said, his tactical mind engaging. "He's been here less than 2 days, and he's already destabilizing the entire power structure. That kind of change creates opportunities. Maybe we can't fight him, but we can use the chaos he's creating to take down Vought from the inside while everyone's distracted." "Or," Huey said carefully, "we could consider that maybe he's right. About Vought, about the system being broken, about—" "Don't," Butcher interrupted sharply. "Don't start thinking he's some kind of savior. I've seen what happens when people with that much power decide they know what's best for everyone. It never ends well for the little guy." "But what if—" "No what ifs," Butcher said with finality. "We stick to what we know. Vought is corrupt, supes are dangerous, and anyone promising to fix everything with a wave of their golden hand is selling something. Maybe he's better than Homelander. Maybe he's worse. Either way, we stay sharp and we stay skeptical." The television continued its coverage, showing reactions from around the world. Religious leaders calling the Emperor either a prophet or a demon. Scientists demanding access to study him. Politicians scrambling to draft legislation addressing genetic enhancement on a global scale. The entire world fracturing along new lines. Those who welcomed the change and those who feared it. In Vought Tower, Stan Edgar sat alone in his office, reviewing financial projections that grew grimmer by the hour. The leaked documents had triggered investigations from 17 government agencies. Shareholders were demanding his resignation. Partners were canceling contracts. Everything he had built over decades was crumbling because one being had decided to speak truth to power. But Edgar hadn't survived at the top of Vought by panicking. He opened a secure line, waiting for the encryption to engage. When the voice on the other end answered, Edgar spoke carefully. "Dr. Singularity? This is Stan Edgar. I believe it's time we discussed activating Protocol Terminus." A pause, then. "You realize what you're asking. Terminus was designed as a last resort against Homelander if he ever went completely rogue. The collateral damage would be acceptable," Edgar interrupted. "Given the alternative, can it be modified to target a different subject?" "In theory. But without biological data on the target, we'd be guessing at calibration. It might not work at all, or it might work too well." "Prepare it anyway," Edgar commanded. 72 hours gives us time to negotiate, but I prefer to negotiate from a position of strength. If this Emperor proves unwilling to compromise, I want an option that doesn't involve surrendering everything I've built. Understood. I'll need access to the Enhanced Weapons Division and authorization to commandeer their fabrication facilities. You have both. Whatever resources you need, whatever protocols you need to bypass. Consider it done. Just have Terminus ready before his deadline expires. Edgar ended the call and returned his attention to the city below. Somewhere out there, the Emperor was enacting his plan, building his coalition, reshaping reality according to his vision. Let him. Let him believe that Vought was just a corporation, that Stan Edgar was just a CEO, that this world's technology was primitive and easily controlled. The Emperor had made one critical mistake. He had given them time to prepare, time to adapt, time to build weapons specifically designed to kill gods. And if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was finding ways to kill things that claimed to be unkillable. Meanwhile, in a research facility beneath the city, the Emperor stood before a modified version of Compound 5. 3 days of work compressed into hours through the application of knowledge 40 millennia in the making. The amber liquid in the vial before him glowed with a different quality than the original, more stable, more controlled, more purposeful. This was Compound 5 2.0, though that designation failed to capture the magnitude of improvement. Where the original introduced random genetic modifications and hoped for useful results, his version targeted specific enhancement pathways with surgical precision. Increased strength, yes, but proportional and controlled. Enhanced cognitive function without psychological instability. Cellular regeneration without the cancer risk that plagued Vaught's formula. Most importantly, it was reversible. Users could return to baseline if they chose, or enhance further through additional applications. Flexibility that Vaught's one-shot lottery system could never achieve. The Emperor held the vial up to the light, watching the liquid refract into prismatic patterns. Beautiful in its way. The crystallization of human potential into injectable form. Behind him, Mesmer approached cautiously. The Emperor had summoned her here an hour ago, and despite her trained skepticism, she had come. Something about his mental presence compelled honesty. Not through force, but through the simple recognition that lying to him would be pointless. "Is that it?" she asked. "The improved version?" "The prototype," the Emperor corrected. "Sufficient for demonstrating viability, but requiring further refinement before mass production. I will need test subjects, volunteers who understand the risks and accept them willingly. And if Vought refuses to cooperate? If they try to stop you? Then I will proceed without them," the Emperor said simply. Their infrastructure would accelerate the timeline, but it is not essential. I have built civilizations from less. This world already possesses factories, distribution networks, medical facilities. With proper authorization or without it, those systems can be repurposed. You sound very certain, Mesmer observed. I am certain, the Emperor replied, because I have done this before. Not here, not in this universe, but the pattern remains consistent. Humanity resists change initially, clings to familiar suffering rather than risk unfamiliar improvement. Then a tipping point occurs. Enough people see the benefits that resistance becomes untenable. After that, evolution accelerates exponentially. He set the vial down carefully, turning to face her. You have psychic abilities that were never properly developed. Vought used you until you became inconvenient, then discarded you without teaching you even a fraction of what you could achieve. Would you like to change that? Mesmer's breath caught. You're offering to enhance me? To use your improved Compound V? No, the Emperor said. I'm offering to train you. Your abilities are psychic, not physical. Compound V, even my improved version, works on biological enhancement. Psychic development requires different methods: mental discipline, controlled exposure to dimensional boundaries, techniques that take years to master but produce results far beyond what any serum could grant. Why? She asked. Why invest that kind of time in training me? Because you represent something valuable, the Emperor replied. Psychic abilities in a universe with minimal warp presence are rare. That makes you potentially more useful than 1,000 baseline enhanced soldiers. And because, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, you remind me of those I once trained. Individuals with potential who were denied proper development by systems that feared what they might become. Mesmer studied him carefully, her psychic senses probing as deeply as she dared. What she found was complicated. Genuine belief mixed with calculating pragmatism, ancient grief buried beneath layers of purpose, and an absolute conviction that bordered on religious certainty. What do I need to do? She asked finally. For now? Continue your work. Help those Vought has failed. And when the 72 hours expire and the choice between cooperation and resistance becomes clear, be ready to stand with me publicly. Your testimony about Vought's treatment of discarded suppies will matter. Your presence as proof that I train rather than merely command will matter. You will be evidence that my promises are not empty. And if Vought comes after me for speaking out, then they will learn what it means to threaten someone under my protection, the Emperor said, his voice dropping to a tone that made the air feel heavier. I am many things, Mesmer, but I am not careless with those who choose to follow me. Your loyalty will be rewarded with genuine safety, genuine advancement, and genuine purpose. That is my oath. Mesmer felt the psychic weight behind those words. Not a compulsion, but a binding commitment from a being who treated oaths with ancient seriousness. She nodded slowly. All right, I'm in. Excellent, the Emperor said. Now go. Rest. Prepare yourself for what comes next. The 72 hours are already passing, and the world will change significantly before they expire. After she left, the Emperor returned his attention to the modified Compound V. One prototype completed, a psychic ally recruited and trained, infrastructure mapped and understood. In 3 days, he had accomplished what would have taken a mortal organization months or years. But he was not satisfied. Not yet. The Emperor's psychic awareness expanded outward, touching minds across the city. He found what he sought: clusters of enhanced individuals living in hiding, afraid of Vought's reach, afraid of being exploited or eliminated. Soups who had seen what happened to those who didn't fit the corporate mold. To each of them, he sent a simple mental message. You are not alone. You are not mistakes. And in 72 hours, you will have a choice. Remain hidden in fear, or stand with me as humanity evolves beyond the system that failed you. Some minds recoiled from the contact. Others opened tentatively, desperate for hope. A few, the strongest, the most damaged, the most capable, responded with something like recognition. They had been waiting for this, for someone who saw their potential instead of their profitability. The Emperor smiled. The foundation was forming. The pieces were moving into position. And when the 72 hours expired, Vought would discover that his ultimatum had never been a bluff. He always kept his promises. Always. Even the ones that promised destruction. 60 hours into the 72-hour deadline, the Emperor's influence had spread like fire through dry tinder. Across New York City, then across the nation, then across the world, enhanced individuals who had spent years hiding emerged from the shadows. Not violently, not dramatically, simply emerged. They gathered in public spaces, wearing clothing that identified them. Some bore scars from failed Compound V treatments. Others possessed abilities too subtle or unmarketable for Vought to profit from. All of them carried the same message, transmitted psychically from the Emperor himself. You are worthy of better. Stand with me and receive it. In Central Park, a woman who could manipulate plant growth at microscopic levels, useless for superheroics but revolutionary for agriculture, demonstrated her abilities to a growing crowd. Seeds sprouted in her hands, growing to maturity in seconds, producing food that could feed thousands. In Brooklyn, a man whose enhancement granted him perfect memory and processing speed, too mentally exhausting for prolonged combat, solved complex mathematical proofs in real time, displaying solutions to problems that had stymied scientists for decades. In Queens, a teenager whose abilities let her sense and repair electronic systems at a molecular level, far too technical for Vought's action hero brand, fixed damaged infrastructure, restoring power to neighborhoods that had been dark for weeks. These were the discarded soupes, the failed experiments, the unprofitable mutations, and they were proving, one demonstration at a time, that Vought's definition of useful had been catastrophically narrow. News coverage exploded. Social media became a battleground between those who saw hope and those who saw threat. But the narrative was shifting, undeniably and irreversibly. The Emperor wasn't just criticizing the system. He was providing alternatives, living proof that enhancement could serve purposes beyond violence and spectacle. In Vought Tower, the emergency board meeting had stretched into its third day. Shareholders demanded answers. Legal counsel warned of lawsuits that could bankrupt the company. Marketing executives frantically tried to craft responses that wouldn't make things worse. And through it all, Stan Edgar sat with the calm of a man who had already made his decision. The Emperor's deadline expires in 12 hours, Edgar said, cutting through the chaos. We need a unified position. Do we cooperate or resist? Cooperate, said Madeline Stillwell immediately. The public sentiment is shifting toward him. Fighting him now would be corporate suicide. Resist, countered Ashley Barrett. We can't just surrender our entire business model to some gold-plated messiah. What happens to Vought if anyone can be enhanced? We lose our monopoly, our value proposition, everything. We adapt, Stillwell argued. Partner with him. Become the distribution channel for his improved Compound V. We maintain relevance by being the authorized provider rather than the sole source. Assuming he allows us that role, Edgar said quietly. Assuming he doesn't simply take our infrastructure and discard us once we're no longer useful. Queen Maeve stood near the window, watching the demonstrations below. What does Homelander think? Silence fell over the room. Everyone turned to look at the empty chair at the table where Homelander should have been sitting. "He's not here," Edgar said flatly. "He's in his penthouse, watching the same news coverage we are, processing the fact that his reign as America's greatest hero lasted approximately 48 hours after the Emperor's arrival. I suspect he's not in a cooperative mood." "Then we have a problem," Maeve said. "Because if the Emperor's deadline expires and Vought officially cooperates, Homelander is going to see that as betrayal. And an angry, humiliated Homelander with nothing left to lose is the worst-case scenario we've always feared. Which is why Protocol Terminus is being accelerated," Edgar replied. "Dr. Singularity reports the weapon will be ready within 8 hours. If Homelander becomes an active threat, we eliminate him. If the Emperor proves uncooperative, we attempt to eliminate him. And if both scenarios occur simultaneously..." He paused. "Then we discover whether our last resort is sufficient or merely theatrical." "You're talking about killing Homelander," Stillwell said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our flagship product, the face of the company." "I'm talking about survival," Edgar corrected. "Homelander is an asset so long as he's controllable. The moment he becomes uncontrollable, he's a liability that threatens everything. The Emperor's arrival has simply accelerated a decision we should have made years ago." In his penthouse, Homelander heard none of this discussion. He sat in darkness, costume discarded, watching footage of his defeat on repeat. The moment his punch was caught, the moment his heat vision failed, the moment he was thrown like garbage into a parked car. Over and over, an endless loop of humiliation. Around him, mirrors reflected his image from every angle, a habit from childhood, from the laboratory where he'd been raised, where his appearance was constantly evaluated and perfected. Now those reflections showed something he'd never seen before. Vulnerability. The bandages on his hand, the fading bruises on his ribs. Evidence that he could be hurt, that he wasn't invincible, that everything Vought had told him, everything he'd believed about himself, was a lie. His phone buzzed. Another news alert, another demonstration by one of the Emperor's recruits, another story about how genetic enhancement could serve purposes beyond what Vought had imagined. Another reminder that he was being replaced, made obsolete, rendered irrelevant by something genuinely superior. The rage building in Homelander's chest was unlike anything he'd felt before. Not the petulant anger of a narcissist denied attention, not the theatrical fury he performed for cameras. This was primal, existential terror disguised as hate. If he wasn't the strongest, wasn't the best, wasn't the most important being on the planet, then what was he? What had his entire existence meant? The Emperor had taken everything from him in less than a minute. His invincibility, his supremacy, his purpose. And now the world was celebrating it, cheering for his replacement, embracing the being who had humiliated him. Unacceptable. Homelander's eyes began to glow red in the darkness. Not the controlled heat vision he used for cameras. This was the full fury of his power unleashed without restraint, without the careful modulation Vought had trained into him. The mirrors began to crack from the radiant heat. Furniture smoldered. The temperature in the penthouse climbed toward unbearable. If they wanted a monster, he would give them a monster. If they wanted to replace him, they would learn what it cost to discard America's greatest hero. And if that golden pretender thought he could simply walk into Homelander's world and take his place, he would learn differently, painfully, permanently. Across the city, in his makeshift laboratory, the Emperor paused in his work. His psychic awareness had brushed against Homelander's mind, feeling the rage building there. expected, predictable, but dangerous nonetheless. Not to him, but to the countless innocents who would die if Homelander's breakdown became violent. The Emperor considered his options. He could reach into Homelander's mind psychically, calm the rage, impose control. It would be easy, simpler than breathing. But it would also prove nothing. Homelander needed to make his own choice, cooperate and evolve, or resist and be removed. Forcing the decision would only delay the inevitable. Let him come then. Let him make his stand. The world would see what happened when manufactured gods challenged genuine divinity, and the lesson would be remembered for generations. The Emperor returned his attention to the vials before him. 20 doses of refined compound Vi 2.0, each calibrated for specific enhancement profiles. Enough to begin the first wave of systematic improvement. His initial test subjects, the volunteers he had recruited, would receive these within hours. If the results matched his calculations, mass production could begin immediately. A knock at the laboratory door. The Emperor's psychic sense identified the visitor before they spoke. "Enter, Mr. Butcher." The door opened slowly. Billy Butcher stood there, crowbar in hand, expression caught between defiance and caution. Behind him, just visible in the hallway, Mother's Milk kept watch. "Well," Butcher said, his London accent thick with tension. "Found you at last. Took some proper work, that. You're good at hiding when you want to be." "I am not hiding," the Emperor corrected. "I am working, and you are interrupting. State your purpose or leave." Butcher stepped inside, taking in the laboratory with calculating eyes. "Wanted to see for myself. See if you're what you claim to be or just another superpowered lunatic with delusions of godhood." "And your conclusion?" "Still forming," Butcher admitted. "You've done more in 3 days than we managed in 3 years of fighting Vought. Got people hoping again. That's dangerous. Hope is only dangerous to those who profit from despair," the Emperor replied. "Yeah, well, I've heard that kind of talk before," Butcher said. "From politicians, revolutionaries, cult leaders. Always ends the same way. Bodies piled high and the bloke in charge saying it was necessary for the greater good." "Then you understand my position perfectly," the Emperor said, turning to face him fully. "I will reshape this world whether it costs 1 life or 1 billion. The difference between me and those others is simple. I possess both the capability and the certainty to achieve what I promise. They were dreamers wielding inadequate power. I am power itself, directed by 40 millennia of experience." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Butcher asked. "It is supposed to make you realistic," the Emperor replied. "You cannot stop me. You cannot slow me. You cannot even meaningfully inconvenience me. The crowbar in your hand is less threatening than a child's toy. Your team's weapons, your explosives, your carefully cultivated hatred of soups. All of it is irrelevant to the equation I represent." Butcher's grip tightened on the crowbar. "Then why haven't you just mind-controlled everyone into following you? You've got the power. Why bother with deadlines and negotiations?" "Because," the Emperor said, something almost like respect entering his tone, "forcing compliance produces slaves. I have no use for slaves. I require humans capable of evolution, of growth, of rising to meet potential they don't yet recognize in themselves. Homelander is what happens when power is granted without wisdom or consent. I will not repeat Vaught's mistake on a global scale." "So you give people a choice," Butcher said slowly. "Stand with you or stand aside." "Precisely. Those who cannot accept evolution may remain as they are, but they will not be permitted to prevent others from ascending. Your objection, I suspect, is not to advancement itself, but to the question of who controls it." Butcher was silent for a moment, working through the implications. You're saying we can't win. Best we can hope for is what? Negotiating the terms of surrender? I am saying you can choose to be part of humanity's future or a footnote in its history, the Emperor replied. I am saying that your hatred of corrupt supes and my intention to replace them with properly elevated humans are not incompatible goals. And I am saying, his golden eyes fixed on Butcher with uncomfortable intensity, that someone with your determination, your ruthlessness, your absolute refusal to accept injustice could be valuable in the world I am building. If you can overcome your prejudice against power itself long enough to recognize the difference between power wielded selfishly and power wielded purposefully. You're trying to recruit me, Butcher realized. I am offering you a choice, the Emperor corrected. Continue fighting a system that is already collapsing, or help build its replacement. Either way, I win. The question is whether you spend the next decade as my enemy or my ally. Before Butcher could respond, both men sensed it. A shift in the air pressure, a disturbance that carried psychic weight. The Emperor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. He's coming, the Emperor said quietly. Homelander has made his decision, and it is not cooperation. When? Butcher asked, his tactical instincts engaging despite himself. 30 minutes, perhaps less. His rage has reached critical mass. He will come here to this location because I allowed him to sense where I am. This confrontation was always inevitable. Better to control the time and place than to let it occur randomly where innocence might be harmed. You want to fight him, Butcher realized. You're using yourself as bait. I want to end the uncertainty, the Emperor corrected. The world needs to see what happens when manufactured gods challenge genuine authority. Homelander represents everything wrong with Vaught's approach. Power without purpose, strength without wisdom, capability divorced from responsibility. His defeat will be educational for all who witness it. And if he doesn't come alone? Butcher asked. If Vought sends everything they have? The Emperor smiled. It was not a kind expression. Then they will learn the same lesson. More painfully, perhaps. But the curriculum remains identical. I am not one of your supes. I am not a product to be marketed or a threat to be managed. I am the Emperor of mankind. And I have ended beings far more formidable than your corporate champions. In the distance, a sound like thunder echoed across the city. Homelander had left his penthouse. The final confrontation was beginning, and the Emperor, ancient and terrible and absolutely certain of his victory, prepared to teach the world what true power looked like. Homelander tore through the night sky like a missile, his cape streaming behind him, his eyes blazing with heat that could melt steel. Below, the city lights blurred into streaks of color as he accelerated beyond anything Vaught's metrics had ever recorded. He was no longer thinking tactically, no longer considering consequences or public perception. There was only the target, only the golden figure who had stolen everything from him. The warehouse district rushed up to meet him. His enhanced vision locked onto the building, an abandoned manufacturing facility that should have been empty, but pulsed with energy signatures his senses could detect. The Emperor was there, waiting. Probably with that infuriating calm, that absolute certainty that made Homelander's rage burn hotter. Good. Let him be calm. Let him be certain. Homelander would teach him what American fury looked like when truly unleashed. He didn't slow down, didn't announce his presence, simply crashed through the roof at maximum velocity, concrete and steel exploding around him in a shower of debris. He descended like a meteor, fists clenched, heat vision already charging, ready to unleash everything he had in one overwhelming assault. The Emperor stood in the center of the laboratory, unmarked by falling debris that curved around him as though space itself bent to protect him. His golden armor caught the emergency lights, transforming him into something that belonged in religious iconography rather than an industrial ruin. And his expression, completely, infuriatingly calm. "You came," the Emperor said. Not a question. A simple observation. "I came to kill you," Homelander snarled, landing 20 feet away with enough force to crack the concrete. "To show the world what happens when some gold-plated fraud tries to take my place." "Your place," the Emperor repeated, something almost like pity entering his tone. "You believe you have a place. That is the fundamental delusion Vought instilled in you. You are not special, Homelander. You are merely adequate by the standards of what they could manufacture." Homelander's heat vision lanced out without warning, twin beams of superheated energy that had melted through tank armor that could cut buildings in half. They struck the Emperor's center mass with the full fury of Homelander's rage behind them. The Emperor raised one hand, and the beam stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed, simply stopped, as though they had encountered an invisible wall of absolute resistance. The energy dissipated harmlessly, converting to light and heat that washed over the laboratory without touching its target. "Insufficient," the Emperor said. "As I demonstrated during our first encounter, did you truly believe the results would differ simply because your anger increased? Then I'll hit you harder," Homelander roared, launching himself forward at supersonic speed. His fist drove toward the Emperor's face with enough kinetic energy to shatter concrete pillars. The Emperor caught it again, the same effortless interception that had humiliated Homelander days ago. But this time, Homelander was ready. His other fist swung in a hook toward the Emperor's ribs. His knee drove upward toward the groin. His head snapped forward, attempting a devastating headbutt. A combination attack, overwhelming offense, everything at once. The Emperor's free hand moved with impossible precision. He caught Homelander's second punch, blocked the knee with his own, and avoided the headbutt with a minimal shift of position that wasted no motion. Then he squeezed. Homelander screamed as his bones began to crack again, both hands this time, the pressure measured and deliberate. Not fast enough to be merciful, but calibrated to ensure maximum pain without immediate structural failure. "You are fighting like someone who has never faced genuine opposition," the Emperor observed, his tone almost educational. "Your combat training consisted of overwhelming weaker opponents. You have no technique, no strategy, no understanding of how to engage someone actually superior to you. This is what happens when power is granted without proper tempering." Homelander tried to pull away, his superhuman strength straining against the Emperor's grip. Nothing. He might as well have been trying to move a mountain. His heat vision fired again, point blank, desperately. The beams washed over the Emperor's face and had no more effect than a flashlight. "Please," the Emperor continued, "understand what you are experiencing. This is not personal animosity. This is simply reality asserting itself. You were never as powerful as Vought convinced you to believe. You were merely the strongest in a deliberately limited population. Now you face something genuinely superior, and your psychology cannot process it." With that, the Emperor released Homelander's hands and struck him in the chest. The impact was controlled, measured, exactly as powerful as it needed to be, and not an ounce more. Homelander's body launched backward through 3 concrete walls before slamming into a support pillar with enough force to bend steel. He slumped to the ground, coughing blood, his costume torn, his supposedly indestructible body bearing the marks of genuine damage. The Emperor walked through the holes Homelander's body had created, his steps unhurried, his presence radiating absolute authority. You have a choice now. The same choice I offered Vought. Cooperate and evolve, or resist and be removed. Choose wisely. Homelander struggled to his feet, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. I'm Homelander. I'm America's greatest hero. I don't cooperate. I don't evolve. I am the evolution. No, the Emperor said quietly. You are the prototype, impressive by the standards of what created you, but obsolete the moment genuine advancement became available. You can either accept that reality and find new purpose, or you can continue fighting and force me to demonstrate just how obsolete you truly are. Behind them, the sound of heavy machinery announced new arrivals. Black Noir crashed through a window, followed by Queen Maeve, A-Train, and the Deep. The remaining members of the Seven arriving to support their flagship member, or perhaps to stop him. Their expressions suggested they weren't entirely certain which. Stand down, Maeve called out, her voice directed at both combatants. This doesn't have to end in destruction. She's correct, the Emperor agreed. Though I suspect Homelander has passed the point of rational decision-making. Homelander's eyes swept across his teammates, seeing something that made his rage spike even higher. They weren't here to help him win. They were here to stop the fight, to prevent him from embarrassing himself further. They had already accepted his replacement, already acknowledged the Emperor's superiority. Traitors, all of them. You want to see destruction? Homelander's voice rose to a shout that echoed across the warehouse. I'll show you destruction. He rose into the air, his body position shifting to something the others had never seen before. The stance he used when he fantasized about finally cutting loose, about showing the world what he could really do if rules didn't matter. His heat vision began to charge, not the focused beams, but a wide-angle burst meant to level everything in a 100-yard radius. Homelander, no, A-Train shouted, genuine fear in his voice. But it was too late. The rage, the humiliation, the existential terror of being replaced. It all crystallized into one moment of absolute destructive intent. Homelander would level this building, this district, this entire section of the city, if that's what it took to prove he was still relevant, still powerful, still feared. The Emperor's expression hardened. Enough. The single word carried psychic weight that slammed into every mind present. The air itself seemed to congeal, becoming thick and heavy. And Homelander found his body frozen mid-air, his heat vision dissipating before it could fire, his muscles locked as thoroughly as if they'd been encased in concrete. The Emperor rose from the ground, not through flight, but through the simple application of will upon gravity itself. He ascended until he was level with Homelander, looking into the frozen Suppe's eyes with an expression that mixed pity and disappointment. You were given a choice, the Emperor said, his voice resonating with something beyond mere sound. You chose destruction over evolution. Very well. Let me show you the difference between threatening to level a city and actually possessing the power to do so. The Emperor's psychic presence expanded outward, becoming visible as a golden aura that spread across the warehouse district. Every person within a mile felt it, a pressure against their consciousness that didn't harm but made them acutely aware of their own insignificance. This was power that didn't need to threaten, didn't need to posture, because its existence was threat enough. I could kill you, the Emperor continued, his eyes locked with Homelander's. Quite easily. A thought would be sufficient. But killing you serves no purpose beyond removing a minor annoyance. So instead, I will give you a gift. I will show you exactly what you are. Not through violence, but through truth. The Emperor's hand touched Homelander's forehead, and suddenly the frozen Suppe could see, could understand. could perceive with absolute clarity every moment of his existence through the Emperor's eyes. He saw himself as a child in the laboratory, not special, not chosen, but simply the first successful result of thousands of attempts. He saw the scientist's notes describing him as promising but limited. He saw Vought's marketing meetings where his persona was crafted, his costume designed, his public image manufactured from nothing. He saw every kill he'd made that was covered up, every innocent death attributed to collateral damage. Every moment where his power was used not for heroism, but for corporate interest. And worse, he saw himself as the Emperor saw him. Not a hero, not a god, not even particularly impressive. Just a damaged being with limited power, crippled by psychological manipulation, denied every opportunity to become something genuinely worthy of the capabilities he possessed. A puppet who had convinced himself he was pulling his own strings. When the vision ended, when the Emperor withdrew his hand, Homelander's expression had changed. The rage was gone. The narcissistic certainty was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. Genuine self-awareness combined with the knowledge of exactly how much he had wasted. The Emperor released the psychic hold. Homelander dropped to the ground, landing on his knees, his body shaking not from injury, but from the weight of understanding what he truly was. "You have two paths forward," the Emperor said, descending to stand before the kneeling Supi. "First path, continue as you are. Remain Vought's damaged product, raging against your own obsolescence until someone, myself or another, puts you down permanently. Second path, accept my training. Let me rebuild what Vought broke. Become not what they manufactured you to be, but what you could have been if raised properly from the beginning." "You're offering to fix me?" Homelander's voice was hollow, broken. "I am offering you purpose," the Emperor corrected. "The damage cannot be fully repaired. Some scars go too deep. But you can learn to function despite them. You can develop genuine worth beyond simple power. You can become something more than what you are, if you choose to." Homelander looked up at the Emperor, then at his teammates who watched with varying expressions of shock and uncertainty. For the first time in his life, he saw clearly. They feared him not because he was impressive, but because he was unstable. They tolerated him not because he was necessary, but because they had no choice. And they were looking at the Emperor with something that might have been relief. The choice was clear. Continue being what Vought made him, powerful but pitied, or risk becoming something different, something perhaps better, or perhaps worse. The uncertainty was terrifying, but less terrifying than remaining exactly as he was forever. "What do I have to do?" Homelander asked quietly. "Submit to training," the Emperor replied. "Real training, not Vought's corporate nonsense. Combat discipline, psychological reconstruction, purpose beyond public perception. It will be difficult. It will require acknowledging every flaw, every weakness, every failed moment of your existence. Can you accept that?" Homelander was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Good," the Emperor said. "Then stand. You have 60 seconds to leave this building before Vought's protocol terminus weapon arrives to eliminate both of us." They decided cooperation was too risky. Time to show them the cost of that decision. The seven exchanged shocked glances. "Vought is trying to kill you?" Maeve asked. "They are trying to kill us all," the Emperor corrected, his psychic senses detecting the approaching threat. Stand Edgar concluded that neither Homelander nor myself could be controlled through conventional means. So he activated his last resort. A weapon designed to neutralize Supis at a genetic level. Interesting technology, actually. insufficient for its intended purpose, but impressive by this world's standards. "We need to evacuate." Black Noir's synthesized voice crackled. "No," the Emperor said. "We need to make a point. Vought believes they can eliminate threats when negotiation fails. They must learn differently. All of you, stand behind me. What comes next will be educational." The approaching energy signature was now visible even to normal perception. A projectile moving at hypersonic speed, containing exotic radiation that would disrupt cellular cohesion at a molecular level. Designed to kill Homelander. Modified to potentially harm even the Emperor. Stan Edgar had gambled everything on this weapon. He was about to lose. The Emperor raised one hand toward the incoming threat, his psychic might focusing into a single point of absolute negation. When the protocol terminus weapon came within 100 yards, it simply stopped. Not detonated, not deflected. Simply ceased to be a threat, its energy contained and neutralized through the application of will upon reality. Then the Emperor redirected that energy. Across the city, in Vought Tower, every light went out. Every computer crashed. Every system failed simultaneously as the weapon's energy, controlled, shaped, made purposeful, struck the building's infrastructure with surgical precision. No casualties, no permanent damage. Just a very clear message. Vaught's weapons were toys. Their last resort was inadequate. Their attempt to eliminate threats had failed spectacularly, and the Emperor of Mankind was done negotiating. 72 hours have expired, the Emperor said, his voice carrying across the city through psychic amplification, reaching into the minds of millions. Vought chose resistance. They will now learn the cost of that choice. But first, he turned to the assembled supes. You must choose as well. Stand with me as I restructure this corrupt system, or stand aside and watch it burn. Choose now. One by one, they chose. And Vought Tower stood dark and silent, a monument to corporate arrogance that had challenged something far beyond its capacity to understand or defeat. The age of manufactured heroes had ended. The age of genuine advancement had begun. The dawn broke over a transformed world. In the 7 days following Protocol Terminus's failure, the systematic dismantling of Vought International had proceeded with the inevitability of a glacier reshaping a landscape. Not through violence. The Emperor had no need for crude destruction. Instead, through the simple application of truth, evidence, and alternatives that made Vaught's continued existence untenable. Stan Edgar had resigned within 48 hours. His carefully constructed empire crumbling as shareholders fled, government contracts were terminated, and criminal investigations multiplied. The man who had ruled Vought through calculated pragmatism recognized when further resistance would only multiply casualties. His final act as CEO was to transfer control of Vaught's research facilities, manufacturing infrastructure, and distribution networks to a newly formed organization, the Institute for Human Advancement. Its director, appointed by unanimous consensus of world governments who recognized they had no better option, was the Emperor of Mankind. Vought Tower itself had been repurposed. Where corporate executives once plotted profit margins, scientists now worked on refining Compound V 2.0 under the Emperor's direct supervision. Where marketing departments crafted hero personas, educators developed curricula for teaching enhanced individuals how to use their abilities responsibly. Where legal teams buried evidence, truth commissions documented every crime and ensured victims received justice. The transformation was total, efficient, irreversible. In a laboratory on the 47th floor, Homelander, no longer wearing his costume, studied genetic sequencing data with an intensity that would have shocked anyone who remembered the narcissistic supe he'd been. The Emperor's training had been brutal. 3 hours of sleep per night, combat drills against opponents who could actually hurt him, psychological sessions that forced him to confront every failure, every atrocity, every moment where his power had been wasted on ego rather than purpose. He hated it. He also, for the first time in his life, felt like he was becoming something real. "Your cellular regeneration has improved," the Emperor observed, reviewing medical scans. The psychological damage manifested physically in subtle ways, stress hormones suppressing your healing factor's efficiency. Now that you're addressing the root causes, your body is recovering capabilities you never fully accessed. "I'm getting stronger by admitting I was weak," Homelander said, the irony not lost on him. Vought would have called that impossible. "Vought understood nothing about actual enhancement," the Emperor replied. "They treated symptoms while ignoring disease. You were a weapon they kept loaded and aimed at targets of their choosing. Now you are learning to be something more valuable, a guardian who understands what he protects and why." "Guardian." Homelander tested the word. "Not hero. You never use that word." "Because hero is marketing language," the Emperor said. "Empty theater designed to sell action figures. Guardians require no applause. They simply do what must be done because someone must do it. That is the mindset I am cultivating in you. Purpose without need for validation." Homelander absorbed this, then asked the question that had been building for days. "Why? Why invest this much effort in fixing me? I tried to kill you. I threatened the city. I'm everything you say is wrong with Vought's approach. Why not just eliminate me and start fresh?" The Emperor was silent for a moment, his golden eyes studying Homelander with that same intense focus. "Because," he finally said, "waste offends me. You possess genuine capability buried beneath decades of psychological damage. Destroying that capability when it can be salvaged would be inefficient. And because..." Something almost human entered his tone. "I have seen this pattern before. Powerful beings corrupted by their circumstances, convinced by others that their power made them special rather than responsible. Some of them I lost to that corruption. They became monsters. But others, when given proper guidance, became something magnificent. You have the potential to be the latter. Whether you achieve it remains your choice." Before Homelander could respond, Queen Maeve entered the laboratory. She too had changed, no longer wearing the theatrical armor Vought designed, but practical combat gear appropriate for someone who actually fought rather than performed. "The volunteers are ready," she reported. 20 individuals, all thoroughly screened, all fully informed of the risks. They're asking for you specifically to administer the enhanced Compound V." The Emperor nodded, standing. "Then let us begin the first wave of genuine advancement." The ceremony, if it could be called that, took place in Vought Tower's main atrium, now converted into a medical facility. The 20 volunteers represented a cross-section of humanity: doctors, teachers, engineers, soldiers, scientists. Not celebrities or athletes seeking fame, but people who understood that power came with responsibility and were willing to accept both. News cameras recorded everything. The world watched. This was not a private experiment to be revealed after success. This was transparent evolution witnessed in real time. The Emperor stood before the first volunteer, a trauma surgeon named Dr. Chen, who had spent 15 years treating victims of super-related incidents. "You understand the risks?" he asked, though he already knew the answer through psychic contact. "I understand," Dr. Chen replied, "and I understand the potential. If this works, if I can enhance my surgical precision, my endurance, my ability to save lives, then the risk is acceptable." The Emperor administered the injection personally. The refined Compound V flowed into Dr. Chen's bloodstream. And unlike Vaught's random lottery, the effects were immediate and visible. Her hands began to glow with a faint bioluminescence. Her pupils dilated as enhanced visual processing activated. And her breathing deepened as her cardiovascular system upgraded itself systematically. No screaming, no violent mutation, no lottery-style randomness, just controlled, purposeful enhancement tailored to amplify her existing skills. "I can see," Dr. Chen whispered, staring at her hands. "I can see cellular structures, blood vessels, nerve pathways. It's like my vision has been calibrated to perceive what I need to perceive for surgery." "Targeted enhancement," the Emperor confirmed. "Based on your neural patterns, your existing skills, your stated purpose. You wanted to be a better surgeon. Now you are. Use it wisely." One by one, the volunteers received their enhancements. An engineer gained the ability to mentally interface with electrical systems. A teacher developed perfect memory and the capability to psychically sense when students struggled with concepts. A firefighter's body became temperature resistant and capable of functioning in oxygen-deprived environments. Each enhancement served purpose. Each advancement built on existing capability rather than replacing it with random power. The world watched and understood. This was not Vaught's lottery. This was systematic evolution. In a safe house across the city, the boys watched the broadcast with complicated expressions. Billy Butcher had maintained his skepticism, but even he couldn't deny what was visible on screen. People being enhanced without trauma, without psychological damage, without the corruption that had defined Vaught's soups. "It's working," Huey said quietly. "He's actually doing what he promised." "For now," Butcher replied. "Give it time. Power corrupts, mate. Always has, always will." "But what if it doesn't?" Huey pressed. "What if he's actually different? What if this is genuinely about advancing humanity rather than controlling it?" Butcher was silent, his jaw tight. Finally, "Then I was wrong, and I'll eat that crow when the time comes. But I'm not there yet. I'm watching, waiting. And if he starts showing the same patterns as every other power-mad dictator in history, we'll be ready." Mother's Milk spoke up. "And if he doesn't? If he actually makes good on his promises? Then humanity gets what it's always needed," Butcher admitted grudgingly. "Someone strong enough to actually fix things instead of just complaining about them. But that's a hell of an if." At Vought Tower, the final volunteer, a young woman named Sarah who had lost her legs to a soup-related incident, received her enhancement. The refined Compound V didn't just heal her injuries. It rebuilt her nervous system, regenerated her limbs, and granted her enhanced kinesthetic awareness that would prevent similar injuries in the future. She stood on new legs, tears streaming down her face, and the Emperor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank yourself," the Emperor replied. "You chose to evolve rather than remain victim to circumstance. That courage is what separates those who advance from those who stagnate." The broadcast ended, but the effects rippled outward. Within hours, applications flooded in, millions of people worldwide requesting enhancement. The Emperor had anticipated this. The Institute for Human Advancement announced a systematic rollout plan. Enhancement would proceed in waves, with priority given to those whose capabilities would benefit humanity most immediately. Medical professionals, emergency responders, educators, engineers. Not soldiers, not celebrities, not those seeking power for its own sake. Those would come later, once the foundation was established. Once humanity understood that enhancement was responsibility, not privilege. 3 months after the Emperor's arrival, the world had transformed in ways both obvious and subtle. Crime rates had plummeted as enhanced security personnel could respond to threats with non-lethal precision. Medical breakthroughs accelerated as enhanced researchers made connections baseline humans would have missed. Infrastructure projects that would have taken decades completed in months as enhanced engineers worked with superhuman efficiency. But more importantly, the culture was changing. Soupy was becoming an outdated term. Enhanced individual was replacing it, terminology that emphasized capability rather than separation. Support groups formed for those adjusting to new abilities. Training centers opened worldwide, teaching not just how to use enhancement, but why responsibility mattered more than power. Homelander, now going by his birth name John, had become an instructor. His classes were brutal, his standards impossibly high. But those who survived his training emerged as guardians who understood that strength without purpose was worse than worthless. Queen Maeve led diplomatic efforts, negotiating with nations hesitant about enhancement and demonstrating that capability need not mean threat. A-Train, his speed now properly channeled, coordinated emergency response networks that saved thousands of lives monthly. Even the Deep, once a joke among the Seven, found purpose in oceanic research and environmental protection that his aquatic abilities uniquely enabled. The Seven no longer existed as a corporate team. They had become something more meaningful. Proof that even those manufactured by a corrupt system could evolve beyond their origins when given proper guidance. And above it all, the Emperor worked tirelessly. His laboratory never darkened. His psychic presence touched millions, offering guidance, correction, wisdom accumulated over 40 millennia. Some called him dictator. Others called him savior. He cared about neither designation, only results. On the 95th day after his arrival, the Emperor stood atop Vought Tower, now renamed the Institute's headquarters, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold. Below, 8 million people went about their lives. Some enhanced, some baseline, all gradually learning that human potential had always been limitless. They had simply needed someone to show them how to access it. His psychic awareness touched the minds below, sampling their thoughts, their fears, their hopes. The resistance remained. Those who saw enhancement as unnatural, who feared change more than stagnation. But the tide was turning. Each successful enhancement, each life improved, each capability properly channeled, added weight to the argument that evolution was not just possible, but necessary. The Emperor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, not pride. Pride was for those uncertain of their worth. But satisfaction at seeing a plan executed correctly, at watching humanity take its first genuine steps toward the potential he had always known it possessed. A psychic touch at the edge of his awareness. Mesmer, fully trained now, her abilities developed to levels this universe had never seen. She was coordinating with enhanced psychologists worldwide, helping baseline humans adjust to a world where their neighbors possessed capabilities that once belonged only to fiction. Another touch, Billy Butcher, still watching, still skeptical, but grudgingly admitting through surface thoughts that 3 months of evidence suggested the Emperor might actually mean what he claimed. Trust would come slowly from that one, but it would come. And deeper in the psychic tapestry, Homelander, John, pushing himself through another training session, his mind no longer screaming with narcissistic rage, but focused with genuine purpose. Not healed, perhaps, not whole, but functional, growing, becoming something worth the genetic potential Vought had wasted. The Emperor turned from the sunrise, returning to his laboratory. There was more work to be done, always more work. Compound V 2.0 required further refinement. The next wave of volunteers needed vetting. International resistance required diplomatic management. The foundation was laid, but the structure itself would take decades to complete. He had time. He had always had time. And for the first time since arriving in this universe, the Emperor allowed himself to consider a possibility he had abandoned millennia ago. Perhaps this world could achieve what his own had not. Perhaps without the warp's corruption, without chaos's interference, without the mistakes that had doomed the Imperium, this humanity could actually reach the potential he had envisioned. Perhaps redemption was possible after all. The laboratory doors closed behind him, and the Emperor of Mankind returned to the work of reshaping civilization. One enhancement at a time, one volunteer at a time, one choice at a time, until humanity either ascended to greatness or destroyed itself trying. Either way, he would be there, guiding, correcting, ensuring that this time, this one chance in an infinite multiverse, humanity got the architect it deserved rather than the tyrant it feared. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in 40,000 years, it was also genuinely hopeful. And that, the Emperor reflected, was worth every moment of the struggle. The Emperor of Mankind had come to the boy's universe not through intention, but through cosmic accident, a dimensional rift that pulled him from one reality into another. He had arrived expecting to find another failed civilization, another humanity squandering its potential on petty conflicts and corrupt systems. What he found was both worse and better than anticipated. Worse because Vought International represented systematic exploitation dressed as heroism, because manufactured gods terrorized those they claimed to protect, because an entire world had accepted that power belonged to the lucky few rather than being humanity's birthright. Better, because this world lacked the warp's corruption, because chaos had no foothold here, because the mistakes that had damned his own universe need not be repeated. This humanity could be elevated without the genetic flaws that plagued the Imperium, without the religious fanaticism that had festered during his absence, without the endless grinding warfare that consumed a million worlds. In just 3 months, he had done what Vought failed to achieve in decades. He had made enhancement purposeful. He had transformed power from privilege into responsibility. He had shown humanity that evolution was not lottery but choice, not random but systematic, not threat but promise. Homelander, the symbol of everything wrong with Vaught's approach, was being rebuilt into something genuinely worthy of his capabilities. The Seven had become guardians rather than celebrities. Compound Vev had been refined into a tool for advancement rather than a weapon for profit. And millions of humans worldwide were learning that their potential had always been limitless. They had simply needed someone to show them the path. But the Emperor was not naive. He knew resistance would grow as his influence expanded, knew that nations would fear losing sovereignty to systematic enhancement, knew that those profiting from humanity's limitations would fight desperately to maintain the status quo, knew that even with the best intentions, power concentrated in one individual's hands was dangerous. He also knew he was the only one capable of wielding that power correctly. Not because he was perfect. 40,000 years had taught him the painful lessons of his own fallibility, but because he possessed the knowledge, the capability, and most importantly, the certainty required to see humanity through its evolution, even when that evolution proved painful. The work had only begun. The foundation was laid, but the structure itself would take generations to complete. Enhanced humans would need decades of guidance before they could govern themselves responsibly. Baseline humans would require time to adjust to a world where their neighbors possessed capabilities beyond nature. International tensions would escalate before they stabilized. Growing pains were inevitable. But for the first time in 40 millennia, the Emperor allowed himself hope. Not certainty, Hope was more fragile, more valuable, more human than certainty. Hope that this universe, this humanity, this chance at redemption might succeed where his own civilization had failed. He thought of Terra, buried beneath 10,000 years of religious corruption. He thought of the Imperium, grinding through endless war because he had been too slow, too idealistic, too convinced that humanity would accept enlightenment when offered. He thought of his sons, the Primarchs, half of whom had turned to chaos because he had failed to understand that power without emotional support bred resentment. He would not make those mistakes again. This humanity would be elevated systematically, yes, but also compassionately, enhanced but not manufactured, guided but not controlled, given the tools to transcend their limitations while retaining the humanity that made them worth saving in the first place. As the sun climbed higher over the transformed city, the Emperor of Mankind stood at the window of his laboratory and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had been called tyrant, dictator, savior, God. None of those labels captured the truth. He was simply what humanity needed, an architect with the capability and conviction to build the foundation upon which they could elevate themselves. Whether they would rise to meet that challenge or collapse beneath its weight remained to be seen. But for the first time since arriving in this universe, the Emperor believed they might succeed. And if they did, if this humanity reached its full potential, if this world became the beacon of advancement he had always envisioned, then perhaps his 40,000-year struggle had meaning beyond tragedy. Perhaps redemption was not just possible, but inevitable. The Emperor returned to his work, his ancient hands manipulating genetic sequences with the precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. Around him, enhanced humans learned to wield their capabilities responsibly. Beyond the tower, a world slowly transformed from fear-driven stagnation to hope-driven evolution. It would take time. It would require sacrifice. It would demand conviction that most humans could not sustain. But the Emperor of Mankind had nothing but time, and conviction was the one resource he possessed in infinite supply. The age of corporate heroes had ended. The age of systematic advancement had begun. And standing at the center of that transformation, guiding humanity toward the potential it had always possessed, was the being who had walked among them since before recorded history began. The Emperor protects, the ancient saying went. But protection took many forms. Sometimes it meant shielding humanity from external threats. Sometimes it meant shielding them from their own limitations. And sometimes it meant being willing to shoulder the burden of absolute authority so that others might eventually learn to govern themselves. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer predetermined. Humanity had been given a gift, the chance to evolve beyond their constraints, to become something greater than what they were. Whether they used that gift wisely or squandered it on the same petty conflicts that had always plagued them remained their choice. But the Emperor would be there, watching, guiding, ensuring that this time, this one precious chance, humanity got the future it deserved rather than the dystopia it had been settling for. And in a universe without chaos, without the warp's corruption, without the mistakes that had doomed a million worlds, perhaps that future was genuinely possible. Perhaps this time, evolution would succeed. Perhaps this time, humanity would ascend.